Hello! Today we are going on a journey together to seek answers to some of life's timeless questions. What is the meaning of life? How can one gain true wisdom? And what makes a person truly happy? But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now make yourself comfortable. Let's begin. Lukos stood at the edge of the cliff, watching the waves crash against the rocks far below. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the land. His small village, a humble place on the coast, lay behind him, almost a distant memory now. He had left it weeks ago, driven by a thirst for knowledge and a desire to understand life more deeply than what the everyday world seemed to offer. The people of his village had never understood him, his questions, his constant yearning for more than the simple rhythm of fishing and daily survival. To them, life was about working the fields, catching fish, and living out the same life that their ancestors had lived for generations. But Lukos had always felt that there was something missing. At 18 summers, he was young, but his mind was always restless. The stories his father had told him as a child, stories of great philosophers, gods, and heroes, had ignited a fire in his heart. He longed to understand the world beyond his village, to understand the deeper meaning of existence, of nature, and of the human soul. These thoughts consumed him more than anything else, and he knew that if he remained, his mind would grow stagnant in the familiar confines of his birthplace. The villagers had their customs, their rules, their ways, but Lukos knew that there was more, and he couldn't rest until he had discovered it. With a final glance at the small, weathered houses of his village, he turned away and began the long journey to the city. The capital was a place of noise, color, and chaos, a stark contrast to the quietude he had left behind. The streets were filled with people from all corners of the world, merchants peddling their goods, philosophers deep in conversation, travelers with strange accents, and children running through the streets, laughing and shouting. It was a world so different from his own that it almost overwhelmed him, but at the same time, he felt a strange sense of exhilaration. Here, he could seek the answers he had been craving, or at least find those who might lead him to them. As he wandered through the crowded marketplace, the smell of bread baking mixed with the sharp tang of salt water from the harbor. His eyes scanned the various stalls, fabrics from distant lands, delicate trinkets, and pots of spices from the farthest reaches of the known world. The colors dazzled him, and for a moment he almost forgot why he had come. But then his gaze fell upon a stall where an older woman was selling fabrics. Bright, intricate designs woven with patterns he had never seen before. She had a presence about her, something about her quiet composure that drew him in. Her eyes met his, and there was a spark of recognition, as though she knew exactly why he had come. She smiled faintly and gestured for him to approach. As he stepped closer, she spoke. "Young man, you have the look of someone seeking answers. What is it that you are looking for?" Her voice was calm, almost as though she were speaking not to him, but to something deeper within him. Lukos was taken aback for a moment, surprised by the directness of her question. He paused, uncertain. "I don't know exactly. I seek wisdom, I think. I want to understand the world, but more than that, I want to understand myself." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she were weighing his words. The search for wisdom is a journey many begin, but few truly understand. Wisdom is not a treasure to be found in books or in the words of others, but in the stillness of the heart. It comes when one learns to listen to the world, to feel it, rather than merely see it. Lukos felt something stir within him, a stirring that echoed deep in his chest. He had spent so much time reading the works of the great philosophers and listening to scholars, yet their words had never quite reached the heart of his questions. There was always something missing, a piece that he could never quite grasp. But here, in this woman's words, he heard something that resonated, something more profound than anything he had heard before. He took a step forward, his curiosity piqued. And how does one learn to listen? How does one learn to hear what is true? The woman smiled again, her expression softening. By being still, by allowing yourself to be present without rushing or forcing anything. You are young and you have much to learn. But remember this, Lukos, wisdom does not come to those who chase it. It comes to those who allow it to unfold in its own time. Her words were simple, yet they struck him with a clarity he had never felt before. It was as if she had given him a key, and for the first time, he understood that the answers he sought were not to be found in the hustle and bustle of the world, but in the quiet spaces between thoughts, in the calm that he had long since forgotten how to embrace. The woman handed him a small, intricately woven cloth, soft to the touch. "Take this," she said. "It will remind you that wisdom is found not in seeking, but in being." Lukos nodded, a deep sense of gratitude washing over him. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew that it had only just begun. With the cloth in his hand and a new understanding in his heart, he thanked the woman and continued his journey through the city. The street seemed less chaotic now, quieter in a way that only someone who had just learned to listen could appreciate. He passed the merchants, the children, the travelers, and for the first time, he truly saw them. Not as figures passing by, but as part of a living, breathing world. Each person was a story, each moment was a lesson. Lukos didn't know where he would go next, but he knew that he had taken his first true step on a path that would lead him not just to wisdom, but to an understanding of life that went beyond knowledge. And so, with a sense of calm he had never known before, Lukos continued on his way. The city no longer felt like a place full of strangers. It felt like a place full of teachers, and he was ready to learn. His journey was only beginning. The following days in the bustling capital were filled with both awe and confusion for Lukos. His mind buzzed with the sights, sounds, and strange new faces he encountered. The city was a labyrinth of ideas and voices, all clamoring for attention. It seemed that everyone had a truth they wanted to share, but for Lukos, the hardest part was discerning which truths were worth his time and which were nothing more than noise. One morning, as he wandered through the crowded streets again, Lukos found himself drawn back to the same marketplace where he had met the woman who had offered him the cloth. He wasn't sure why, but something inside told him that he needed to return. Maybe it was the peacefulness of her words that lingered in his mind, or maybe it was the curiosity that had begun to gnaw at him, urging him to explore more deeply the mystery of life that he had just begun to touch. As he walked past the familiar stalls, his eyes caught sight of a familiar face. It was Nikia, the woman from the marketplace. She was sitting on a small wooden stool, her weathered hands carefully arranging the fabrics. Her eyes met his, and once again, there was that quiet understanding in her gaze. She gestured for him to come closer. "Back again, young philosopher?" she asked, her voice warm with a touch of amusement. "Have you found what you were looking for yet?" Lukos hesitated, glancing around the market before meeting her gaze. "I don't know," he confessed. "I feel as though I've only just begun to understand that there is much more to learn." But how does one begin to truly learn? There is so much noise, so many voices in the world. How do I separate the truth from the distractions? Nikia nodded, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're right. The world is full of noise, but the truth is not hidden in the chaos. It is always with us, beneath the surface of things. The trick is not to search for it endlessly in the world around us, but to quiet our own minds long enough to hear it." Lukos frowned slightly, feeling both comforted and frustrated by her answer. "But how can I quiet my mind? How do I silence the noise that keeps pulling me in every direction?" "You must first accept that the mind is never truly silent," Nikia said, her voice steady and calm. "It is like a rushing river, constantly moving, never still. But what you can do is learn to listen to the flow, to be aware of it without being consumed by it. If you want to find truth, Lukos, you must learn to observe, not just act. To listen, not just speak. It is not about silencing the mind completely, but about observing the patterns of your thoughts, the way they flow, and then letting them go." Lukos thought about this for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. It wasn't the answer he had expected, but it felt right. There was something in the simplicity of her words that spoke to him on a level he hadn't yet fully understood. "But how do I begin?" he asked, eager to know more. Nikia stood up slowly, taking a deep breath as she gazed out over the bustling marketplace. "Start with yourself. Before you can begin to understand the world, you must first understand your own mind. That is the beginning of wisdom. She reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small bundle of cloth, handing it to him with a smile. It was the same kind of fabric she had been selling, but this piece was different. It was woven with intricate patterns, each thread seemingly connected to another in a delicate dance. "Take this with you," she said. "It is not just a piece of cloth, it is a reminder that the world is always interconnected, like the threads of this fabric. Your thoughts, your actions, and the world around you, they are all connected. Understanding one part of the fabric helps you understand the whole." Lukos took the cloth from her, feeling its weight in his hands. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he could sense that it was important. He thanked her quietly, a sense of gratitude blooming in his chest. As he walked away, he felt a shift within himself. He had come to the city seeking knowledge, but he now realized that the true knowledge he sought might not come from the endless stream of ideas and philosophies that surrounded him. It might come from something simpler, something more subtle, the ability to listen, to observe, and to be present in the moment. The more he walked through the market, the more he began to notice the small details around him. The way the sunlight filtered through the gaps in the awnings, the laughter of children playing in the distance, the gentle hum of conversation between strangers. Each of these small moments was a part of the larger pattern, a reminder of the interconnectedness of life. He had spent so much time looking outward for answers, but now he realized that he needed to look inward as well. To find his place in the fabric of the world, he first needed to understand his own place in the fabric of his mind. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets, Lukos felt a strange sense of peace. He didn't know where his journey would take him, but he knew that it had already begun to lead him somewhere important. The noise of the city still swirled around him, but now, for the first time, he could hear the silence beneath it. The world was speaking, and he was beginning to listen. The days passed, and the city continued to unfold in all its complexity and vibrancy. Lukos wandered its streets, and each day he found himself slowly changing. The noise, once overwhelming, had become something he could navigate. He no longer found himself swept up by it. He had learned to listen, to hear the pauses between sounds, to understand the rhythm of the city, its heart beating quietly beneath the surface of its chaotic pulse. But still, something was missing. He knew that there was more to discover, that the deeper questions still lingered unanswered. And so, with the wisdom of the cloth in hand and the guidance of Nikia's words, Lukos set his sights on the next step of his journey, to find a true teacher, someone who could show him the way forward. It was in the heart of the city's bustling square that Lukos first heard of Erasius. The old philosopher had been a recluse for many years, living far from the noise and confusion of the city, deep within the mountains. Some claimed he had withdrawn from society to avoid the distractions of the world, while others believed he had uncovered ancient truths and was in search of disciples. No one seemed to know exactly where he lived, but the rumors were enough to stir something within Lukos. The idea of finding someone who had chosen solitude over the distractions of the world, someone who might offer answers that went beyond the superficial chatter of the city, filled him with a quiet excitement. Lukos made the decision quickly. He knew that to continue his journey, he needed to find this man, this sage who had chosen the silence of the mountains. It was a long and arduous journey, one that would take him through winding paths, over steep hills, and across valleys filled with thick forests. But the more he thought about it, the more certain he became that this was the path he needed to follow. He packed only the essentials: food, water, and, of course, the cloth that Nikia had given him. It would be his reminder to stay grounded in his search for wisdom, to never lose sight of the simple truths that had already begun to shape his journey. As the days passed, Lukos found himself growing more and more eager to meet Erasius, to learn what this philosopher had to teach. The journey was exhausting, but Lukos felt something within him urging him forward. He had never traveled so far from home, and the landscapes around him seemed both familiar and foreign at once. He passed through villages where people greeted him with curiosity, but he rarely stopped to speak. His mind was set on the goal that lay ahead. The higher he climbed, the more the world below seemed to fade away. The noise, the clutter of the city, it felt distant now. Here, on the mountain paths, there was only the sound of his breath, the crunch of gravel underfoot, and the quiet whisper of the wind. It was on the fourth day of his journey that he finally reached the foot of the mountains, where a small hut stood, nestled against the rocks. It was humble, made of stone and wood, with a small garden that surrounded it. The air here was thin and cool, and as Lukos approached, he saw a figure sitting outside the hut, meditating in the quiet stillness. The man was older, his hair and beard touched with gray, but his posture was straight, his presence commanding despite his simplicity. He wore simple robes, his hands resting on his knees as if he had been sitting like that for hours, days, perhaps even longer. Lukos hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach this man who had lived so far from civilization, whose wisdom, from what he had heard, was unparalleled. With a deep breath, Lukos stepped forward and spoke, his voice soft but clear. "I have come seeking wisdom. I have heard of you, Erasius, and I believe you can guide me." The man opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment, his gaze locked onto Lukos's. It was as though the world itself paused for that brief moment, the weight of the sage's gaze piercing through to the very core of Lukos's being. There was no judgment, no question in his eyes, only an unspoken understanding. After a long silence, Erasius spoke. "You have come to me, but first you must understand why you came," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Do you know what it is you seek, young traveler? Or are you simply following the path of curiosity, hoping that it will lead you to something greater?" Lukos was caught off guard by the question. He had never been asked such a thing, not in the way Erasius had phrased it. It made him pause, think. He had followed his instincts, his desire for wisdom, but had he truly understood what he was looking for? He had learned so much already, and yet there was still a sense of emptiness within him. "I am seeking understanding," Lukos said after a moment of reflection. "Understanding of myself, of the world, of everything that lies beyond the surface. I want to learn to live with purpose and clarity." Erasius nodded slowly, as though Lukos's words had confirmed something he had already known. Purpose and clarity are not found in answers, young one. They are found in questions. To understand the world, you must first learn to see it without expectation, without the need to define it or control it. Lukos felt a ripple of realization pass through him. It was not what he had expected to hear. For all his searching, he had been so focused on finding answers, on reaching a point where everything made sense. But now, Erasius was telling him that the pursuit of understanding was not about certainty. It was about embracing uncertainty, learning to live with the unknown. "You have already taken the first step," Erasius continued. "By coming here, by seeking, you have begun your journey. But now, you must learn to walk this path without rushing. You must learn to sit in stillness, to listen to the world around you, and to observe the movements of your own mind. Only then will you begin to understand what it means to live with purpose." Lukos sat down in front of the sage, the words settling deeply within him. For the first time, he felt that he was in the right place, that he had found a teacher who truly understood the depths of what he sought. He realized that this journey would not be one of quick answers, but of slow, deliberate growth. And that was exactly what he needed. For hours, the two men sat in silence, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional chirp of birds in the distance. Lukos did not need to speak, did not feel the need to ask more questions. He understood now that the questions would come in time. For now, it was enough to be still, to listen, and to absorb the quiet wisdom that filled the air between them. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting the landscape in soft hues of orange and pink, Lukos felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. His journey was just beginning, but for the first time, he felt that he was on the right path. The noise of the world, the endless questions, had faded into the background. Now it was just him, the sage, and the mountains. And that, he realized, was enough. The days that followed Lukos's meeting with Erasius were marked by deep reflection. The sage had spoken little, and yet Lukos felt that every moment spent in his company was a revelation. Erasius had taught him the art of stillness, the importance of observing, and the need to let go of the impulse to always seek immediate answers. The world, as the sage had said, was not something to be conquered, but to be understood, piece by piece, slowly, and with great patience. But despite the profound wisdom Orasius had shared with him, Lukos still felt a growing restlessness within him. He knew there was more to learn, something deeper, perhaps even more personal. He was learning to listen to the world, to the movements of his own thoughts, but something inside him told him that to fully understand himself, he would need to see the world through different eyes. He had studied the mind, the self, and the external world. But now, perhaps it was time to explore something that could connect all of these in a different way. His search for something new led him down a path far from the quietude of Orasius's mountain retreat. Lukos had heard whispers of a renowned artist living in a distant coastal village, someone who was said to capture the very soul of the world in her paintings. The rumors were that her work was unlike anything anyone had seen before, that it conveyed truths not just through images, but through emotion, evoking deep introspection in all who viewed her work. As he left Orasius's home, Lukos's thoughts were filled with questions about this mysterious artist, named Calypso. He wondered if the art she created could offer something different from the wisdom he had gained from Orasius. Perhaps it would help him see the world not just through thought, but through emotion. Perhaps it would deepen his understanding of the human experience in a way that words alone could not. The journey to the coastal village took several days, but Lukos felt a sense of purpose. The gentle salt air and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs greeted him as he arrived. The village was small but vibrant, with fishermen unloading their daily catch and children running through the streets. There was a relaxed energy here, different from the bustle of the city or the solemn stillness of the mountains. It was a place where life flowed like the tides, constantly changing, always in motion. Lukos had heard that Calypso lived on the edge of the village, in a small cottage that overlooked the sea. He found her easily. Her home was open, inviting, with large windows that framed the view of the ocean, and the sound of waves crashing filled the air. Calypso was in the midst of painting when Lukos arrived. She was seated at an easel, her eyes focused intently on the canvas in front of her. The colors on her palette were vibrant, an array of reds, blues, and yellows, as if she were trying to capture the very essence of the world in her brushstrokes. When she noticed Lukos standing in the doorway, she smiled warmly. "Ah, you must be the one seeking answers through art," she said, her voice calm but full of life. "Come, sit with me. I will show you what I have learned." Lukos stepped into the room, his eyes drawn to the painting she was working on. It was an abstract composition, strange yet beautiful. The swirling colors seemed to capture movement, light, and shadow in a way that made Lukos feel as though he were looking at the soul of the world itself, not just a representation of it. There was something powerful in the way the colors seemed to pulse, almost as if they were alive. "I've heard that you capture emotions in your paintings," Lukos said, his voice filled with curiosity. "How do you do that? How do you make something so intangible, so invisible, visible?" Calypso set her paintbrush down and turned to face him. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing his question. "Art," she began, "is not about simply replicating what we see with our eyes. It's about feeling, about allowing the emotions to flow through us and giving them form. When I paint, I don't just look at the world. I try to feel it. I close my eyes and listen to the rhythm of the world, the way the wind moves through the trees, the way the waves crash on the shore. I try to capture that energy, that emotion, in every stroke." Lukos thought about this for a long time. So art is not just about what we see then. It's about what we feel. It's about connecting with something deeper than our thoughts. Calypso nodded. "Exactly. Art allows us to access a part of ourselves that words cannot reach. It taps into something primal, something human. When you look at a painting, what you see is not just the image. You see the emotion behind it. The passion, the joy, the sorrow, the longing, all of it is there. And when you can connect with that, when you can feel it in your heart, you begin to understand the world in a way that is impossible through reasoning alone." Lukos sat down on the small chair beside her, his eyes still fixed on the painting in front of him. "But how can I learn to see in this way?" he asked. "How do I learn to feel the world instead of just thinking about it?" Calypso smiled. A gentle, knowing smile. "You've already started. The fact that you are here, Asking these questions shows that you are ready. You must learn to open your heart, to feel without judgment, without restraint. Start by observing the world around you, not just with your eyes, but with your senses. Listen to the sound of the wind. Feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. Allow yourself to be immersed in the world, rather than trying to distance yourself from it with logic and reason. She stood up and walked toward a shelf filled with completed canvases. One by one, she picked them up and held them out to Lukos. Each painting was different, but they all conveyed a sense of raw emotion, joy, sorrow, longing, peace. Each one seemed to speak to him in a way that words never could. "You see," she continued, "this is what art does. It brings us closer to the truth of our emotions, and through that, closer to the truth of life itself. When we feel deeply, we begin to understand what it means to be human. We stop separating ourselves from the world around us and realize that we are part of it, just as each stroke of paint is part of the larger canvas." Lukos picked up one of the paintings, a depiction of the sea at dawn. The colors were soft and muted, yet they seemed to hold an entire universe within them. For a long moment he stared at it, feeling something shift within him. It was as if the painting itself had opened a door to something he had been unable to express, an understanding that transcended reason and entered the realm of the heart. "I understand now," he said quietly, almost to himself. Art is not just a way of seeing the world. It is a way of feeling it, and through that feeling, we come closer to the truth. Calypso smiled again, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You've learned the first lesson, Lukos. The world is not just a place to be studied and understood. It is a place to be felt, to be experienced. And through that experience, we connect with something far greater than ourselves." For the rest of the day, Lukos remained with Calypso, watching her paint, learning from her wisdom. The evening sun cast long shadows across the cottage, and as the sky deepened into night, Lukos felt a sense of peace that he had never known before. His journey had taken him to many places, but it was here, in the quiet presence of an artist, that he had begun to understand the world in a new way, through feeling, through emotion, through the heart. And as he left the cottage later that evening, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore seemed to speak to him in a language he had never heard before, one that could not be captured by words or logic, but only by the silence between them. Lukos continued his journey through the coastal village, but his heart was restless. The lessons he had learned from Calypso had been profound. Art had shown him a way to feel the world more deeply, to connect with the very essence of life. But still, something within him tugged at his soul, urging him to seek further. It was as if a deeper truth awaited him, one that would bind together all that he had learned so far. The threads of wisdom he had gathered, stillness from Erasius, emotional depth from Calypso, needed something more, something to tie them together. As he walked through the village, the idea of finding more answers stayed with him, and he couldn't ignore the whispers in the air that there was a man, an old storyteller, who lived on the outskirts of the village. The locals spoke of him in reverent tones, as if he held secrets from the past, memories from another time. His name was Grikos, and despite his age, he had a presence that seemed timeless. The village's elders often gathered at the small tavern in the evenings, exchanging stories of their youth, of ancient heroes, and forgotten gods. One evening, Lukos decided to visit the tavern, drawn by the sense of quiet mystery surrounding Grikos. The tavern was warm, filled with the sounds of gentle laughter and the clinking of mugs. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of fish stew simmering in the back. Lukos approached the fire, where several older men sat, their eyes gleaming with the stories of the past. At the center of them all sat Grikos, his white beard flowing like the rivers of time, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of years lived fully. His voice was deep and rich, filled with the weight of a life spent in search of truths hidden beneath the surface. It was to him that Lukos was drawn, and it didn't take long before the old man noticed him. "You look like a man who's seen more than his share of the world," Grikos said, his voice both welcoming and knowing. "But still, I see the question in your eyes. Come, sit. Perhaps I have something to share with you." Lukos felt a quiet anticipation as he took a seat beside Grikos. The other men nodded in acknowledgement, but it was clear that Grikos was the one they all listened to. He was the keeper of stories, the weaver of memories. "I am seeking wisdom," Lukos said, his voice filled with a quiet humility. "I have traveled far, and I have learned much from the great philosophers and artists I have met. But still, I feel that there is something missing, something I must understand before my journey can be complete." Grikos smiled, his eyes gleaming. "Wisdom, you say?" "Ah, yes, the endless search for it. The truth is, my young friend, you are not the first to seek it, nor will you be the last. But it is not in seeking wisdom that we find it. Wisdom comes when we learn to live with the questions, when we stop looking for answers that are too simple, too clear." Lukos felt a familiar stir within him. It was a truth that Eratius had spoken to him, but now, hearing it from Grikos, it felt different, like the same words, but with a new resonance. "I have seen many people," Grikos continued, "who chase after wisdom, thinking that it is something to be found at the end of a journey. They travel across lands, meet great people, and seek knowledge, but they miss something important. They miss the fact that wisdom is not something you find. It is something you become. It is not something separate from you. It is who you are." Lukos listened intently. Grikos's words were like the wind, carrying with them a deep, unspoken truth that seemed to reach beyond the surface of his thoughts. He had always thought of wisdom as something external, something he had to find, something he could acquire like treasure. But now he was beginning to see that wisdom was not an object to be obtained. It was a process of becoming. It was about learning how to live in harmony with the world, how to weave oneself into the fabric of life itself. "But how does one become wisdom?" Lukos asked, his voice soft but eager. Grikos looked at him, his eyes deep with understanding. "It begins with the stories, my friend. Stories are the bridges between the past and the present. They teach us who we were, who we are, and who we might become. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles, that we are part of something greater than ourselves. You seek wisdom, but perhaps the first thing you need is to learn how to listen to the stories of those who came before you." Lukos thought about this for a moment. It was something he hadn't considered before, the importance of stories in shaping the soul. He had been so focused on seeking answers, on searching for the truth, that he had neglected the power of the stories that others carried within them. He had listened to the wisdom of the philosophers, yes, but he had not yet listened to the stories of the people, the lives lived, the lessons learned, the mistakes made. Grikos continued, his voice slow and measured. "We are all part of a larger story, Lukos. You are part of it, I am part of it, and so are all of us sitting here. The stories we tell, whether they are about gods or men, triumph or tragedy, are all reflections of the same truths. And when we listen to them, we begin to understand our place in the world. We learn that we are not alone in our struggles, our joys, or our fears. The stories connect us all. They are the threads that bind us together." Lukos's mind began to open to this new idea. The search for wisdom, he realized, was not just about finding isolated truths. It was about understanding the larger narrative of life. He had been so focused on intellectual knowledge, on finding the right answers, that he had forgotten the importance of connection, the connection to others, to the past, and to the stories that had shaped them. "But how do we truly listen to the stories?" Lukos asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "How do we make them our own?" Grikos chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with mischief. That is the question, isn't it? The answer, I think, lies in your heart. You must listen with more than your ears. You must listen with your soul. The stories are not just words. They are experiences, emotions, lessons. They are the living memories of those who have walked before us. And when we truly listen, we are not just hearing words. We are feeling the pulse of life itself. Lukos sat quietly, absorbing the weight of Grikos's words. For the first time in his journey, he felt as though he had touched something deeper than intellect, something that went beyond reason, beyond philosophy. It was the connection to life, to the collective experience of humanity. He realized that wisdom was not just about knowledge, it was about understanding the rhythm of life, about embracing the stories that had shaped the world. The evening wore on, and Grikos continued to share his stories, tales of heroes, of gods, of ordinary men and women who had faced the trials of life and had emerged stronger for it. As Lukos listened, he began to feel a shift within himself. The questions he had carried with him for so long seemed to fade into the background. For the first time, he wasn't seeking answers. He was simply listening. And in that listening, he realized that wisdom was not a destination to reach. It was a way of being. It was in the stories, in the connections, in the shared experiences of all those who had walked before him and beside him. The wisdom he had been seeking was not something to be found in books or teachings. It was something to be lived, felt, and experienced. As the night deepened, Lukos felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He had come to the village seeking wisdom, but now he understood that wisdom was not something you could search for. It was something you could only experience by living, by listening, by connecting with the stories of others. And with that, Lukos knew that his journey was far from over. There were still more stories to hear, more lessons to learn, and more wisdom to discover. But for the first time, he understood that the path itself was just as important as the destination. The days in the coastal village passed with Lukos continuing his conversations with Grikos, each one revealing more layers of wisdom and understanding. Yet, as much as he had learned, Lukos felt that his journey was not yet complete. The lessons he had learned from Erasius had taught him the importance of stillness and observation. Calypso had opened his eyes to the power of feeling and emotion through art. Grikos had helped him understand the depth of human connection, the importance of stories in shaping our lives. But there was still something missing. Something deeper, something more primal was calling to him. He began to feel that, despite all the intellectual and emotional growth, there was a part of him that remained unfulfilled. It was as if his mind and heart were in harmony, but his body, the very vessel that carried him through the world, was left behind. It was not enough to simply understand the world through thought and emotion. He needed to learn how to live fully in his body, to connect with the physical world in a way that grounded him and brought him into deeper alignment with the truths he had learned. It was during one of his long walks by the sea, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and purple, that Lukos met someone who would guide him toward this missing piece. While walking along the shoreline, Lukos noticed a group of men practicing martial arts in a small clearing, their movements fluid, synchronized, and filled with purpose. The sound of their breath mingled with the crashing waves, and their focused energy seemed to echo the rhythm of the ocean itself. One of the men, seeing Lukos's gaze, approached him with a friendly smile. "You seem intrigued, young man," the man said, his voice steady and calm. "Would you care to learn what we do here?" Lukos had always been curious about the martial arts, but it was never something he had pursued. However, now, standing before these men who were so connected to their bodies, he felt a deep urge to understand. "I've always sought wisdom through the mind and the heart," Lukos said, "but I now realize that I've neglected the body. Perhaps it's time I learned to connect more fully with it." The man smiled, his eyes gleaming with recognition. "Then you are in the right place. My name is Lycon, and I teach the way of the body. It is a path not just of physical strength, but of inner balance. If you wish to understand yourself fully, you must begin with the body, for it is the foundation of everything. The mind, the heart, they are all rooted in the body." Lukos nodded, eager to begin this new phase of his journey. Lycon guided him to join the group, and soon he was learning the basic movements of their practice. Slow, deliberate stretches, controlled breathing, and simple stances that challenged his body in ways he had never imagined. The practice was not about strength alone, but about unity, balance, and precision. Every movement was connected to the next, every breath was synchronized with each motion. As the days passed, Lukos began to notice subtle changes. His body, once a vessel that simply carried him from one place to another, now became an integral part of his spiritual and intellectual growth. The strength he was building in his arms and legs mirrored the strength he was developing in his mind. The discipline of martial arts brought him a deeper sense of calm, a feeling of inner harmony he had not expected. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Lycon gathered the group for a meditation session. It was a quiet moment of stillness, where each person sat in a circle, eyes closed, focusing solely on their breath. Lukos had meditated before, but this meditation felt different. It was not just about calming the mind, it was about grounding himself in his body, becoming aware of every muscle, every breath, every sensation. He felt the air on his skin, the weight of his body on the earth beneath him. Slowly, his mind began to settle, his thoughts fading into the background as he became more attuned to the present moment. When the meditation ended, Lycon spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. The body is our connection to the world. It is through the body that we experience the world, its beauty, its pain, its joy, and its suffering. We can try to separate ourselves from it, to live only in the mind or the heart, but we will never truly understand life until we honor the body as part of the whole. Lukos felt the truth of these words settle deep within him. He had spent so much time seeking wisdom through the intellect, through philosophy and art, but now he understood that the body was not separate from the mind and heart. It was part of the same whole. The physical, emotional, and intellectual aspects of his being were interconnected, and until he honored the body, he could never fully understand the world around him. Over the next few weeks, Lukos's practice deepened. He spent hours each day training with Lycon and the other students, learning to move with grace and precision, to listen to the language of the body. His body, once just a tool for survival, became a conduit for deeper understanding. Each muscle, each breath, each movement was a step toward wholeness. He learned that strength was not only about force, but about control, balance, and harmony. He began to see the world not just as a place to be understood intellectually, but as a place to be experienced physically. One morning, after a particularly intense training session, Lukos sat by the sea, gazing out at the horizon. The waves crashed gently on the shore, and the air was thick with the scent of salt. His body ached, but it was a good ache, one that told him he was growing stronger, both physically and spiritually. He had spent so many years in search of wisdom, thinking that it existed only in the mind. But now he understood that wisdom could not be confined to one aspect of being. It was not just about thinking or feeling, it was about being present in every moment, in every part of yourself. As Lukos sat there, he realized that his journey had come full circle. He had sought wisdom in the city, in the art of feeling, and in the stories of the past. But now he understood that wisdom was not found in any one place, in any one practice. It was found in the integration of all things: thought, emotion, and body. He was no longer seeking answers in isolation. He was learning to live in harmony with the world, to experience it with all of his senses, to embrace every part of his being. Lycon's teachings had given him the key to understanding the body's role in his spiritual journey. He had learned to see the body not as a separate entity, but as an essential part of the whole. The mind, the heart, and the body were all interconnected, each one feeding into the others, creating a balanced and harmonious whole. This was the true wisdom, the understanding that everything in life is interconnected, and that the journey to wisdom is not a linear path but a journey of integration and balance. As the sun began to set, casting its warm glow across the sea, Lukos felt a deep sense of peace. He had come to this village searching for something, not knowing exactly what it was. But now, sitting on the shore, he realized that the search was not about finding something external. It was about discovering what had always been within him: the wisdom to live fully, to experience the world with all of his senses, and to honor every part of his being. His journey was far from over, but now, for the first time, he felt whole. Lukos spent several more months with Lycon, absorbing the lessons of physical discipline, balance, and connection with the world. His body grew stronger, more agile, and his mind clearer. Yet, despite all the progress he had made, there remained a growing sense that something was still missing, a final piece of the puzzle. He had learned how to understand his body, connect emotionally through art, and find stillness in his mind. But as the seasons changed and the winds began to cool, the quiet feeling of incompleteness persisted. Lukos needed more than physical strength and inner harmony. He needed a deeper understanding of purpose, One morning, as Lukos was taking a walk along the shore, deep in thought, he came across an old man sitting in the sand. He had a weathered face, his hair and beard speckled with gray, and his hands were calloused and rough, the marks of years spent working the seas. The man's name was Arkip, and like many others who spent their lives at sea, he had the look of someone who had lived many lifetimes in one. Arkip sat still, gazing out at the horizon. When Lukos approached, the old man turned to him with a knowing smile, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of age. "Ah, another young soul searching for answers," Arkip said, his voice deep and warm. "Tell me, what brings you here, boy?" Lukos hesitated for a moment before responding. "I have been traveling for a long time, seeking knowledge and wisdom from many teachers. I've learned much about the mind, about emotions, and even about the body. But still, something is missing. I need to understand something deeper, what it means to have purpose. I feel as though I am searching, but I don't know what I am searching for." Arkip nodded slowly, as though he had expected Lukos's words. "Purpose," he murmured. "It is something that calls to us all, at some point or another. But purpose is not something you find at the end of a journey. It is something that you create, with every step you take along the way." Lukos felt a stirring inside of him, as if Arkip's words were resonating deeply. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "How can purpose be something we create?" Arkip smiled softly and patted the sand beside him. "Come, sit with me," he said. "I will tell you a story." Lukos sat down beside the old man, and Arkip began his tale, the words flowing like a calm river, steady and sure. "I spent many years at sea," Arkip began. "When I was young, I believed that my purpose was to sail, to explore, to chart the unknown waters of the world. I thought that if I could master the seas, I would find meaning in it. I traveled far, saw things that few men ever would, and came to understand the rhythms of the ocean as if it were a part of me. But no matter how far I sailed, no matter how many treasures I found or strange lands I visited, there was always something missing. I never felt as though I had truly discovered my purpose. It was always just beyond my reach." Lukos listened intently, drawn into the story. Arkip's words had a weight to them, a lived experience that could not be ignored. "Then one day," Arkip continued, "I found myself on a small, desolate island, far from any known shore. I had been blown off course by a storm, and my ship was damaged. I spent weeks on that island, alone. It was a hard time, one of struggle and fear. I had no maps, no compass, no way of knowing if anyone would ever come for me. It was there, in the quiet of my solitude, that I realized something important. I had spent so much of my life seeking purpose outside of myself, searching for something to fulfill me, that I had forgotten to look inward." Lukos frowned slightly. "You mean you found purpose while stranded on an island?" Arkip chuckled, his eyes softening with the memory. "Yes, in a way. I realized that purpose wasn't something to be found in distant lands or great accomplishments. It was something that I had to create, in the small, everyday moments. When I was alone on that island, I found peace in the simple things, the sound of the waves, the warmth of the sun on my face, the feel of the sand between my fingers. I began to see that purpose wasn't about finding some grand external goal. It was about living with intention, about understanding that every action, no matter how small, was part of something much larger." Lukos thought about this for a long moment. "So, you mean that purpose is not a destination? It's the way we live our lives every day?" Arkip nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Exactly. Purpose isn't something you reach at the end of your journey. It's something you create with each step you take along the way. It's in the decisions you make and how you treat others, and how you live in harmony with the world around you. You see, boy, purpose isn't something that's handed to you. It's something you build with your hands, with your heart, and with your mind. It's the way you choose to live day by day." Lukos was silent for a long while, the weight of Arkip's words settling into his heart. He had spent so much time seeking wisdom in the great teachers, in the grand ideas, in the abstract concepts that filled his mind. But Arkip's words spoke to something deeper, a truth that resonated within his very being. Purpose was not a singular goal to be attained. It was the way he lived, the choices he made, the small acts of intention that guided his path. It was in the simple things. "I think I understand," Luco said quietly. "Purpose is in every moment. It's in the way we approach life itself." Archip smiled, his eyes crinkling with understanding. "Yes, that's it. Purpose isn't something you chase after. It's something you live every day. When you live with intention, with awareness of each moment, you will find that your purpose reveals itself, not as a destination, but as a way of being." Lucas felt a shift within him. The restless feeling that had lingered for so long began to fade. He no longer needed to search for some grand purpose, some distant goal. He understood now that purpose was not about finding something outside of himself. It was about how he chose to live, how he engaged with the world. His journey was not about reaching an end point. It was about the path itself, about living each step with awareness, with intention. As the sun sank lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the shore, Lucas sat in silence with Archip, absorbing the quiet wisdom of his words. The sound of the waves, the rustle of the wind in the trees, the call of seabirds, all of it seemed to speak to him in a language he could finally understand. Purpose was not some distant, unattainable ideal. It was in every breath, every action, every choice. The world was full of wisdom, of stories, of teachings, of experiences, but the true purpose of life was not something to be found through external means. It was something to be created, nurtured, and embraced in the everyday moments. Purpose was a journey, not a destination. And with that, Lucas felt a profound sense of peace. His search had come full circle. He was no longer seeking, he was living. Lucas spent a few more weeks in the coastal village, reflecting on Archip's words. The old sailor's wisdom had brought clarity, and he found himself at peace for the first time in a long while. He no longer felt like a wanderer adrift in search of answers. His journey had unfolded in unexpected ways, and with each step, he had come closer to understanding the interconnectedness of all things. Yet, as the days passed, an undeniable pull began to tug at his heart. The quiet restlessness that had lingered for so long began to return, but this time it was different. It was not a desire to find something new, but to return to something old, something foundational. Lucas had learned much from the sages, the artists, and the sailors he had encountered. But there was one place he had not yet returned to, his home. The village he had left behind so many months ago still lingered in his memory, and he realized now that he had not just been searching for wisdom in distant lands, but for something deeper, something rooted in his own past. He needed to return, to reconnect with his roots, to understand what it was about his home that had driven him away in the first place, and more importantly, to see how he had changed since he left. His departure had been fueled by a deep desire to learn, to expand his mind, to explore the greater world beyond the simple life of a fisherman. But in the years that had passed, Lucas had come to realize that the answers he had been seeking were not just found in the grand philosophies of great thinkers or the emotional expression of artists. They were also embedded in the simplicity of his origins, in the everyday lives of the people who had shaped him. Lucas packed his things, said his goodbyes to Lycon and Calypso, and set off once more, heading back to his village. As he walked, the landscape around him seemed both familiar and foreign, as if he was returning to a place he had never truly known. The road was long, winding through the hills and forests, but this time, Lucas did not rush. He walked slowly, savoring the sensation of each step, feeling the earth beneath his feet and the weight of his past and present entwined. When he finally reached the village, it was late in the evening. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and purple, casting a warm glow over the humble cottages and fishing boats that lined the shore. The sounds of the village were the same as he remembered, laughter echoing from the square, the call of seagulls, the soft murmur of the sea. But as Lucas stood at the edge of the village, watching the familiar scene, he felt a deep sense of unease. It was not fear, but something else, a sense of distance, as though the place he had once called home had become a shadow of the world he had come to know. He walked through the streets, greeting familiar faces, but there was a quiet sense of alienation. The people here, though kind, seemed unchanged. The fishermen still went about their daily routines. The children still played in the streets, and the old men still gathered at the market to talk about the weather and the crops. Nothing had really changed, except for him. Lukos had become someone different, someone whose mind had expanded, whose heart had grown deeper with each new lesson learned. Yet the village seemed to remain trapped in the same cycle of existence it always had been. Finally, Lukos made his way to his childhood home, a small cottage at the edge of the village. His parents had long since passed, but the house still stood, a silent witness to the years that had gone by. He stood at the door for a long while, his hand resting on the weathered wood. It was here that his journey had begun, here that his questions had first taken root. And now, standing on the threshold, he realized something profound. His journey had not been about escaping this place, but about finding a way to return to it, not physically, but spiritually. He had been searching for something outside himself, but now he understood that the true purpose of his journey had always been to return to his own center. Lukos entered the house and sat by the old fireplace, the memories of his youth flooding back with each crackle of the fire. The room was filled with the same quiet comfort it had always had, yet there was a new awareness within him. He could hear the sounds of the village outside, the laughter of the children, the familiar calls of the seagulls, and for the first time, he saw them not just as the background of his life, but as part of a larger whole. His mind, heart, and body had all come to a place of understanding. But now he saw that true wisdom was not about escaping one's roots, it was about understanding them. As the night deepened, Lukos sat by the fire, reflecting on all he had learned. His mind wandered back to Horatius, to the sage who had taught him the art of stillness, to Calypso, who had shown him the power of emotion and art, and to Grikos, who had reminded him of the power of stories and connection. He thought of Lycon, who had taught him to honor his body, and of Archeep, who had shown him that purpose is not a destination, but a way of living. Lukos realized that he had spent so much time seeking wisdom in distant places that he had almost forgotten the wisdom that was inherent in his own life, in the simple rhythms of his village, and in the relationships that had shaped him. His journey had been about finding the threads of connection that wove through all of existence, and now he understood that those threads were not just in the world beyond, but in the very fabric of his past. His home was not a place to escape from. It was a place to return to reconnect with, and to build from. As the fire burned low, Lukos stood up and walked out into the night. The stars were bright above, and the cool breeze carried with it the scent of the sea. He could hear the sounds of the village behind him, but now, instead of feeling like an outsider, he felt a deep sense of belonging. His journey had taken him far, but it had led him back to this place, to the roots of who he was. The village, with all its simplicity and quiet rhythm, had always been a part of him. The people here had shaped him, just as he had shaped them. His journey had not been about leaving it all behind, but about understanding it, embracing it, and integrating it into the larger story of his life. The wisdom he had gained from all his travels, all his teachers, was not something to be hoarded or kept separate. It was something to be shared, something to be woven back into the very fabric of the life he had once known. And with that realization, Lukos felt a profound sense of peace. His journey had come full circle, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had found a way to live with the questions, to integrate all the lessons he had learned into a life that was both his own and part of something much larger. He had returned to his roots, not just physically, but spiritually, and in doing so, he had found the wisdom he had been seeking all along. As Lukos settled back into the rhythms of village life, he began to see the world through new eyes. What had once seemed like a simple, even mundane existence now appeared rich with meaning. His return home was not the end of his journey. Rather, it marked the beginning of a new phase, one in which he would integrate all that he had learned. The lessons of stillness from Horatius, the deep emotions conveyed through art from Calypso, the power of story and connection from Grikos, and the bodily discipline taught by Lycon. Each one was now a part of him. But it was not enough to simply know these things intellectually. He needed to live them, embody them, and share them with those around him. In the weeks that followed, Lukos began to reach out to the people of the village. He found himself in the marketplace not as an outsider, but as a participant in the flow of life. He engaged in conversations with the fishermen, not merely as a visitor, but as someone who could share his thoughts on the interconnectedness of life, the importance of balance, and the wisdom of the body. He helped them repair their nets, not as an expert, but as a humble student who had learned to appreciate the value of each moment of hard work. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Lukos sat with the elder council of the village, an informal gathering of the oldest and most respected members of the community. They sat around a fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool night air. Lukos had shared many of the lessons he had learned from his travels, but now he wanted to hear their stories, to learn from their wisdom, the wisdom born not of books or distant lands, but of a life lived close to the earth, in harmony with the land and sea. As they gathered around the fire, an elder named Theon spoke, his voice low and steady. "You have traveled far, Lukos, and have learned many things, but there is something that cannot be learned through books or teachers. It is something we who have lived long have come to understand. It is the wisdom of living fully in each moment, of embracing the simple truths that shape our everyday lives." Lukos leaned forward, eager to hear more. Theon's words resonated with him. They were not just theoretical musings, but the practical wisdom of someone who had lived through the seasons, who had seen both joy and hardship, and had learned to navigate life's cycles with grace. "You see," Theon continued, "we are all part of the cycles of life. The seasons come and go, the tides ebb and flow, and we too must learn to flow with them. There is no wisdom in resisting what is. The key to living well is to understand that we are always in a state of becoming, never static. Life is not something to be controlled, but something to be embraced. The more you fight it, the more it slips away from your grasp." Lukos pondered these words, feeling a deep sense of truth in them. He had spent so much of his journey seeking, fighting against the current of life, always looking for something more, something beyond. But now, sitting by the fire with these elders, he realized that the wisdom of life was not about conquering the world around him, but about aligning himself with it, living in harmony with its natural rhythms. "You've learned the mind's wisdom," another elder, Thessa, said, her voice soft but clear, "and the heart's wisdom. Now you must learn the wisdom of the hands, the wisdom of doing, of working with the land, with the sea, and with the people around you. It's in the everyday work, the simple tasks that sustain life, that we find true wisdom. We plant the seeds, tend to the crops, repair the boats, and weave the nets. It's through these acts of service, through labor and love, that we live fully." Lukos looked down at his hands, worn from the days of work alongside the fishermen. He had been learning from them, not just about the physical labor of the sea, but about the joy and satisfaction that came from doing something with purpose. The sense of fulfillment he had long sought in intellectual pursuits and artistic expression had been found in the simplicity of these tasks. There was wisdom in every action, every small decision that shaped the rhythm of daily life. For the next few months, Lukos devoted himself to the work of the village, not as a visitor, but as a true participant. He helped with planting in the fields, mended the boats with the fishermen, and sat with the elders as they told their stories of the past. His physical body, which had once been merely a vessel to carry him on his journey, became a vital tool for connection. He learned the value of physical labor, of giving his body to the earth and the sea. It was through these simple acts of work and service that he began to truly understand the interconnectedness of life. One morning, as Lukos sat by the sea, watching the fishermen cast their nets into the water, he felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had come full circle. He had traveled the world, seeking wisdom in distant lands, learning from the greatest minds and the most skilled artists. But now he understood that the true wisdom he had been searching for was not found in any one place or philosophy. It was found in living fully, in embracing each moment, in participating in the great cycle of life. His mind, heart, and body were finally in alignment. He had integrated all the lessons he had learned into his daily life, and the village, once a place he had left in search of something greater, had become the very heart of his wisdom. It was in this place with these people that he had come to understand the most important truth of all. Life is not a destination, but a journey that is lived, experienced, and shared with others. It is through the simple acts of living, of working, of connecting, that we find meaning. Lukos stood up and walked down to the shore, the waves crashing gently against the sand. He felt a deep gratitude for everything he had learned, each teacher, each moment, each lesson that had shaped him. The world was not something to be understood from a distance, but something to be embraced, to be lived with intention, with purpose, and with love. And as the sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden light across the sea, Lukos knew that his journey was not over. He had found peace, but the path ahead was still open, still full of discovery. The road was never truly complete, for it was the journey itself that held the wisdom. With a heart full of gratitude, Lukos returned to the village, ready to continue his journey, not as a seeker, but as a participant in the ever-unfolding story of life. Lukos had finally returned to the village, his journey of exploration seemingly at an end. Yet, in the stillness of the early mornings, as the first light of dawn stretched across the sky, he found himself quietly asking, "Is this truly the end of my search?" His heart knew that his return had not been a retreat, but a deepening of all that he had learned. The village had become the place where his lessons could take root, where the seeds of wisdom could grow, not in the form of abstract ideas, but in lived experiences. But despite this newfound peace, Lukos felt a subtle unease, an inkling that there was one more lesson to be learned, one that would complete his integration of mind, body, and spirit. He had learned how to still his mind, to engage his body, and to listen to the stories of those who had come before him, yet the underlying pulse of the world had yet to fully reveal itself. He had connected to nature, to art, to history, and even to the wisdom of work. But now he needed to understand the final piece: connection to others. It was the early days of winter when Lukos's understanding of this truth began to take shape. The cold winds had arrived, and the villagers were busy preparing for the harder months. They worked together, mending boats, gathering firewood, and storing the last of the harvest. The community came alive in the face of winter's challenges, and Lukos began to notice something he hadn't before: the power of their shared efforts, the interconnectedness of their work, and the silent but undeniable strength that came from their bonds with each other. One evening, as Lukos walked through the village, he noticed a small group of men and women gathered by the fire, talking and laughing, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the flames. He approached, feeling an innate pull to join them. The conversation turned from the weather to the difficulties they had faced that year. The unusually poor harvest, the harder winds that had delayed their fishing boats, and the sickness that had claimed a few of the older villagers. Despite these challenges, however, the mood was light, and the laughter never stopped. Lukos took a seat among them, and one of the older women, Sophia, noticed him immediately. "Ah, Lukos, we've heard much of your travels and the wisdom you've brought back with you. What is it that you have learned?" Lukos felt the weight of the question, but smiled as he thought about all the knowledge he had gathered. "I've learned much, Sophia, but what I understand now is that wisdom is not something you seek from afar. It's something that you share with others. It is through the bonds we form with one another that we learn the deepest truths." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Ah, yes, but surely there is more. Don't you find wisdom in solitude, in quiet reflection?" Lukos nodded. "I once thought that wisdom was something found only in quiet places, in moments of stillness. But I have come to realize that it is the connections we have with others that teach us who we are. When we live in community, when we work together, we reflect not just our own wisdom, but the collective wisdom of those around us. There is a beauty in shared experience, whether through hardship, joy, or labor, that shapes us into who we are meant to be." The group fell silent for a moment, considering Lukos's words. Then a young man named Damon spoke up. "But do we not also find our purpose in serving others, in contributing to the well-being of those around us?" Lukos's gaze softened as he turned to Damon. "Yes, Damon. In giving to others, we find a deeper connection, not just to the world, but to ourselves. Our purpose is often revealed through service. It's in the act of helping, of giving, that we discover who we are and why we are here. The more we are willing to serve, the more we open ourselves to receiving the wisdom of the world around us. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. I see now. You are saying that our purpose is not something we find in isolation, but something that comes from our connection with the world and with each other. Lukos smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace settle within him. Exactly. Each of us is a thread in the great fabric of life. And when we are connected, when we live with others in harmony, we become part of something greater than ourselves. As the night continued, the fire flickered low, and the group began to share stories from their past. Stories of how they had come together to overcome obstacles, how they had supported each other through personal losses, how they had celebrated the victories of others as their own. These stories wove a tapestry of collective memory, a shared understanding of what it meant to be part of a community. The wisdom in these stories was not found in intellectual pursuits, but in the lived experiences of the people who had come together to face the challenges of life. For the first time, Lukos understood the power of community. It was not just the sharing of knowledge or the exchange of ideas that created wisdom. It was the deep, unspoken bond that formed when people came together, worked together, and supported each other. The collective strength of the village, the silent understanding that came from years of shared experience, was its true wisdom. The following days were filled with work, but now Lukos saw everything through a new lens. The act of mending nets with the fishermen, of helping to prepare food with the women, of tending the fields with the farmers. It was all part of the larger tapestry. Every task, no matter how small, was a thread that added to the beauty of the whole. One afternoon, as Lukos helped to build a new shelter for the winter, he saw the strength of the community reflected in the actions of the people around him. Everyone worked together, each person contributing their skills, their knowledge, and their strength. There was no hierarchy, no sense of competition. It was a unity born of necessity, of mutual support, and of shared purpose. Later that evening, after the shelter had been completed, the village gathered in the square to celebrate. The warmth of the fire and the laughter of the people filled the night air. Lukos felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had embraced him not as an outsider, but as one of their own. They had shown him what it meant to live in connection, to be part of something larger than himself. As the fire burned low and the festivities began to wind down, Lukos found himself sitting beside Sophia once more. She smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with a quiet wisdom. "You have learned much, Lukos," she said, her voice soft but filled with meaning. "But the greatest lesson, the one you've been searching for all this time, is here. It's in the people, in the community. It's in the bonds we share, the love we give, and the wisdom we pass down to one another. This is where life's true meaning is found." Lukos nodded, the truth of her words settling deep within him. He had spent so long seeking wisdom in distant lands, in lofty ideas and abstract philosophies. But now he understood that the true wisdom of life was found in the simplest, most profound act of all: connection. As the last embers of the fire flickered out, Lukos knew that his journey was not over, but it had come full circle. He had learned to live with intention, to embrace his mind, heart, and body, and to connect deeply with those around him. The journey of life was never about seeking answers in isolation. It was about finding connection, about becoming part of something greater, about living with others in harmony. With that understanding, Lukos felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had been long, but it had led him exactly where he needed to be: home, in the heart of a community that had taught him the most important lesson of all. As the months passed in the village, Lukos felt a profound shift within himself. His journey, filled with teachers, experiences, and insights, had finally led him back to the people and the place where it all began. Yet despite the deep wisdom he had gained, he was still unsure of how to reconcile his internal growth with the world around him. He had learned so much from the philosophers, the artists, the elders, and the fishermen, but there remained a sense that there was still more to understand, a final piece that would complete his integration into the fabric of life. He had spent years seeking external wisdom, but now he wondered if there was a different kind of wisdom, one that lay in silence. One cold evening, as the village settled into a peaceful stillness, Lukos found himself once again by the shore. The moonlight bathed the sea in a soft ethereal glow, and the waves lapped gently at the shore. He sat on the rocks, feeling the cool air brush against his face, and allowed himself to simply be. There was no agenda, no goal, no search. For the first time in a long while, Lukos simply allowed himself to sit in silence, embracing the quiet of the night. It was during these moments of solitude that Lukos began to hear a deeper truth emerging within him. All of the wisdom he had gathered, all the lessons he had learned, seemed to converge in the silence. The sounds of the waves, the rustling of the wind, the distant calls of the birds, they all became part of a larger symphony, a rhythm that connected him to the world in a way words and thoughts never could. It was as though the silence itself held the answers he had been searching for all along. As the days passed, Lukos sought out more moments of quiet reflection, away from the hustle of village life. He spent time walking in the fields, sitting by the river and meditating by the trees. In these moments of stillness, he began to see the wisdom that existed in the silence, the unspoken truths that could not be captured in words or philosophy. The world around him seemed to open up in ways he had never experienced before. In the absence of distractions, he found a deeper connection to the present moment, a sense of peace that transcended all the intellectual knowledge he had accumulated. One afternoon, while walking through the forest on the outskirts of the village, Lukos met a hermit who lived in a small, humble cabin. The man, known only as Theros, had lived alone in the woods for many years, away from the noise of the world. Theros was an elderly man with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of quiet contemplation. As Lukos approached him, he noticed that Theros had a calm and peaceful presence, as if he had learned to live fully in the silence of the world. "Are you here to seek wisdom?" Theros asked, his voice gentle and steady. Lukos nodded, a sense of curiosity rising within him. "Yes, I have been searching for answers, for knowledge, for purpose. I have learned much, but there is still something I feel I must understand." Theros studied Lukos for a long moment, his gaze penetrating yet kind. "And what do you think you are searching for, young traveler?" Lukos paused, considering the question. "I believe I am searching for the final piece of the puzzle, the deeper truth that ties everything together, the wisdom that lies beyond the mind, beyond emotion, beyond action. I have learned from many teachers, and I have experienced so much, but there is still a part of me that is not at peace. I seek something that is beyond words, beyond thought." Theros smiled softly, his eyes twinkling with a deep understanding. "Ah, you have come to the right place then. For the wisdom you seek is not something that can be found in books or spoken by others. It is found in silence." Lukos frowned, puzzled. "Silence?" Theros nodded. "Yes, silence is the canvas on which all wisdom is painted. It is the space in which all thoughts, all emotions, all actions find their meaning. The mind is like a river, constantly flowing with thoughts and ideas. But the wisdom of the world is not in the river. It is in the stillness beneath it. You have sought wisdom in many places, but now you must learn to find it in the silence." Lukos sat quietly, taking in Theros's words. He had always associated wisdom with knowledge, with learning, with the pursuit of understanding. But Theros was telling him something different, that true wisdom was not something to be sought externally, but something to be discovered in the space between thoughts, in the moments of stillness that allowed everything else to settle. He realized that the deeper wisdom he had been searching for had always been within him, but it could only be accessed in moments of quiet reflection, when the noise of the world faded away. "You see," Theros continued, "the silence is not empty. It is full of everything. It is the space from which all things arise and to which all things return. When you can sit in silence, when you can be present with yourself and the world without needing to label or define, you will begin to see the interconnectedness of all things. You will understand that wisdom is not something that comes from the outside. It comes from within, from the quiet center of your being." Lukos sat with this truth for a long time, feeling the weight of it settle within him. He had always been so focused on seeking, on finding answers, on understanding the world intellectually. But now he saw that the answers were not to be found in the search itself. They were to be found in the willingness to be still, to simply exist in the present moment without the need to control or understand. It was in the silence that he could hear the true voice of wisdom, the voice that transcended all thoughts and ideas. As Lukos spent more time in the company of Theros, he began to learn the art of silence. It was not a silence of emptiness, but one of deep presence. He learned to meditate in the forest, to listen to the wind as it rustled the leaves, to feel the warmth of the sun on his skin without needing to interpret it. The more he practiced, the more he found that his mind became clearer, more peaceful. Thoughts no longer came rushing in like waves crashing against the shore. Instead, they floated by like clouds in the sky, leaving behind only stillness. Lukos spent the next few months with Theros, learning the art of silence, of listening deeply to the world without needing to speak. He began to understand that wisdom was not something that could be grasped or owned, but something that could only be experienced in the quiet moments of life. It was in the stillness of the night, the silence between words, the pauses between breaths, that he found the deepest truth. When it was time to leave Theros, Lukos felt that he was no longer the same person who had arrived. The restless search that had once defined him had fallen away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. He had learned that true wisdom was not in knowing, but in being. It was not in accumulating knowledge, but in being present with the world as it was. As he made his way back to the village, Lukos felt a deep sense of gratitude for all the teachers he had met on his journey. Each of them had shown him a different aspect of wisdom, but it was Theros' teachings that had finally brought everything together. It was in silence that all the other lessons had found their meaning. In silence, Lukos had found the truth of life itself, the truth that was always there, waiting to be discovered, hidden in plain sight. As Lukos re-entered the village, he knew that his journey was far from over. There was still much to learn, still much to experience. But now, with the wisdom of silence as his guide, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. After his time spent with Theros, Lukos felt a profound transformation within himself. The wisdom of silence, the art of stillness, had finally given him the peace and clarity he had sought for so long. He had gone through his journey, from the bustling city streets to the quiet hills of the mountains, from the depths of artistic expression to the strength of physical labor. Now, as he re-entered his village with the stillness of mind and heart, he felt more connected than ever to the people and the life around him. The village had always been a place of simplicity, where the days followed the rhythm of the seasons and the community worked together. Lukos had seen this simplicity through the lens of his intellectual pursuits and emotional experiences. But now he saw it with a newfound appreciation. The village was not a place to escape from. It was a place to be embraced, to learn, and to contribute. As he reconnected with the people around him, he began to see how everything, every task, every conversation, every relationship, was part of a larger, interconnected whole. The work of the fishermen, the farmers, the artisans, each person's contribution, no matter how small, was part of the intricate web that held the community together. Every action had meaning, and through the simple acts of daily life, the wisdom of the world was passed from one generation to the next. One afternoon, as Lukos worked alongside the villagers to prepare for the upcoming harvest festival, he found himself deep in conversation with an old friend, Althea, whom he had known since childhood. Althea had never left the village, and her life had always been rooted in the rhythms of the land and the sea. She was one of the elders now, respected for her quiet wisdom and her deep understanding of the world. As they worked, Lukos asked her, "Althea, how is it that you've lived here all your life and seem to understand so much about the world? You've never traveled, never gone seeking wisdom in distant places, and yet your understanding of life is deeper than I ever imagined." Althea smiled softly, wiping her brow as she worked. "Ah, Lukos, you've learned much in your travels, and I'm proud of you for seeking knowledge. But wisdom isn't just found in books, or in the words of teachers. It's found in living fully, in participating in the cycles of life, in being present for each moment, and in learning from the people and the land around you." Lukos listened intently, intrigued by her words. But surely there's more to wisdom than just living day to day, isn't there? There are great minds, great teachings, philosophies that help us understand the world on a deeper level. Althea nodded, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. Yes, the world is full of wisdom, and we can learn much from others. But there's something unique about the wisdom that comes from living in harmony with the earth, from working with the people around you. It's a wisdom that's passed down not through written words, but through shared experiences, through the seasons, through the relationships we build, and through the small acts of care and attention we give to one another. Lukos thought about this. He had traveled so far and learned so much, but he realized now that the wisdom he had been seeking had always been present in the simple, everyday moments. The conversations around the fire, the shared laughter and tears, the quiet tasks that bound the community together. Althea continued, "You see, Lukos, wisdom isn't something you can find outside of yourself. It's not something to be grasped or achieved. It's something you grow into day by day as you live and learn. It's the lessons that come from being present, from being with others, and from being a part of the cycle of life. And just as the seasons change, so too does our understanding. The wisdom you seek doesn't come from being in a distant place or reading a book. It comes from living the life you've been given and embracing the wisdom that comes with it." Her words settled deeply within Lukos, and for the first time, he understood that his journey had never been about seeking something far away, but about fully embracing the life he had already been given. He had learned from the sages, from the artists, from the hermit in the forest, but now he saw that the true wisdom he sought had been waiting for him all along, in the very simplicity of life in the village. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the village gathered to celebrate the harvest festival. There was music, laughter, and dancing as people came together to give thanks for the abundance of the land and the sea. Lukos found himself among the villagers, laughing and sharing stories, feeling the deep sense of connection that had eluded him for so long. He was no longer a seeker, no longer someone in search of answers. He was simply part of the world, part of the larger tapestry of life. As the night wore on, Lukos sat with Althea by the fire, watching the flames dance and crackle in the cool evening air. He felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that his journey was not over, but that it had come to a new understanding. The wisdom he sought was not in distant places or hidden truths. It was in the relationships he had built, the work he had done, and the love he had shared with those around him. "You've found it, haven't you?" Althea said quietly, her eyes fixed on the fire. Lukos looked at her, the answer clear in his heart. "Yes," he said softly, "I've found it. The wisdom I've been seeking was always here, waiting for me to see it." Althea smiled, her face glowing in the firelight. "And now you can live it." The music and laughter of the festival filled the air, but Lukos felt as though everything had become still. In that moment, he understood that life was not a journey to an end, but a continuous flow, an ongoing process of learning, living, and connecting. Each person, each story, each shared experience added to the wisdom of the whole. As the festival continued, Lukos felt the deep sense of belonging that he had been seeking. The search for wisdom was not about finding the perfect answer. It was about embracing the journey, the cycles of life, and the connections we make along the way. It was in the simplicity of living, in the relationships we build, and in the small acts of kindness and care that we find the deepest wisdom. The fire burned brightly, and as Lukos looked around at the faces of the people he had come to love, he felt a deep gratitude for the life he had found. He was no longer searching for answers. He had come home, to himself, to the village, to the people who had always been there, teaching him the most important lessons of all. And in that moment, as the music swirled around him and the stars lit up the sky, Lukos knew that he had finally found the peace he had been searching for. His journey had come full circle, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had come to understand the truth of life itself. The truth that it is not in seeking, but in living, that we find our purpose. As the seasons continued to shift, Lukos felt a quiet contentment settle into his life. His understanding of wisdom had reached a place of balance, one in which he no longer felt the need to search for answers outside of himself. He had come full circle, returning to the village not as a seeker, but as a participant in the ever-unfolding process of life. The wisdom he had learned from Erasius, from Calypso, from Gricos, Lycon, Archip, Theros, and Althea was no longer a collection of separate lessons. They had all woven together, forming a tapestry of understanding that resonated with his being. And now, more than ever, Lukos felt connected to the world in a profound way. Yet even in this piece, Lukos could sense that there was always more to learn, more to experience, more to understand. He had come to realize that life was not about reaching some final destination of wisdom, but about embracing the journey itself, living in the flow of time and change. And so, as the days passed, he continued to live each moment with intention, aware that the search for truth was not a path to a distant goal, but an ongoing process that would evolve throughout his life. One cold evening, as the village was preparing for the long winter months, Lukos found himself once again by the shore, gazing out at the expanse of the sea. The waves crashed gently against the rocks, the moonlight reflecting off the water like silver threads. He could feel the stillness of the night, the quiet hum of the world beneath the surface of his thoughts. It was in these moments of solitude that he found the space to reflect, to look inward, and listen to the wisdom that had been cultivated within him over the years. As he sat there, deep in thought, a familiar figure approached him. Althea, her white hair flowing gently in the wind. She had become not only a mentor to Lukos, but a source of quiet strength and guidance. She had lived through countless seasons, and her perspective on life had always been grounded in experience, in a deep understanding of the natural rhythms that govern the world. "You are deep in thought, my friend," Althea said, her voice soft and knowing. "What troubles you?" Lukos turned to her, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "I find that the more I learn, the more I realize how little I truly understand," he said. "I have traveled far, learned from many, and lived in many ways, but there is always a sense that I am on the edge of something larger, something beyond what I can fully grasp. It is as if wisdom is a vast ocean, and I am but a small boat on its surface." Althea sat beside him, looking out at the water with a quiet smile. "Wisdom, like the ocean, is endless," she said. "It is not something you can fully understand or contain. The journey is not about conquering wisdom, but about living with it, being in its flow. You have come to realize that wisdom is not just in what you know, but in how you live. It is in the way you connect with others, the way you embrace each moment, and the way you accept that you will never fully know the answer. The beauty of life is that it is always unfolding." Lukos nodded, absorbing her words. "But how do I live in that flow? How do I embrace the unknown without feeling lost in it?" Althea's eyes softened, and she looked out over the sea once more. "You live in the flow by embracing the uncertainty, by trusting in the process. Just as the ocean is ever-changing, so too is life. There will always be unknowns, always be challenges, but it is in those moments of uncertainty that we grow. It is in the journey, the movement, the experience that wisdom is gained. And the secret is not in seeking control or understanding every detail. It is in letting go, in allowing life to guide you, knowing that you are part of something much larger than yourself." Lukos felt a profound stillness within him as Althea's words settled in his heart. He had always sought to understand everything, to grasp the full picture, to make sense of the chaos around him. But now he understood that true wisdom was not in seeking control over life, but in surrendering to its flow, in trusting that each moment, each experience was a part of the larger tapestry of existence. "You have always lived with this understanding, haven't you?" Lukos asked, his voice filled with admiration. "You have embraced the flow of life, accepted the uncertainties, and found peace in it." Althea smiled gently, her eyes twinkling with quiet wisdom. "I have lived long enough to understand that life is not about knowing all the answers. It is about being present, being aware, and being willing to learn from each moment. The more we try to control or understand everything, the more we distance ourselves from the truth. The truth is not something to be grasped. It is something to be lived." Lukos sat in silence, feeling the weight of her words. For so long, he had sought answers, constantly moving from one teacher to the next, hoping to find a final, complete truth that would tie everything together. But now he understood that the answers were not waiting for him to find them. They were already within him, in the way he lived, in the way he engaged with the world, in the relationships he had built. Wisdom was not something to be attained, it was something to be embraced. As they sat together, the sound of the waves filled the air, a constant, soothing rhythm. Lukos realized that, like the ocean, wisdom was vast, deep, and ever-changing. There would always be more to learn, more to experience, more to understand. But the beauty of this journey lay not in reaching the end, but in embracing each moment, in living fully in the flow of life. After a long pause, Lukos turned to Althea, a smile forming on his lips. "I understand now. The journey doesn't end with understanding everything. It ends when we stop seeking answers and start living them." Althea returned his smile, her eyes filled with warmth. "Exactly. The journey is never truly complete. We are always becoming, always growing, and that is the beauty of life. It is in the constant unfolding that we find the deepest wisdom." As the moonlight bathed the sea in its silver glow, Lukos felt a deep sense of peace. He had come full circle, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had come to understand that the answers were not the point. The point was in the living, in the experiencing, in the being present with the world around him. He had learned that wisdom was not a destination, it was a journey, and the journey itself was the answer. The days in the village passed with a quiet sense of fulfillment for Lukos. His days were spent in rhythm with the land and the people, no longer searching for distant answers, but living in the present, participating fully in the world around him. Yet, as the seasons continued to change and the soft breath of spring began to stir the earth, he felt a familiar pull in his heart, a reminder that, even in peace, the journey of life was not static. Time was ever flowing, like a river that never ceased to move forward, and Lukos realized that his understanding of wisdom was still growing, still unfolding, as was his relationship with the world. One crisp morning, Lukos found himself walking the familiar path to the riverbank, where the water glistened like silver beneath the rising sun. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. He had been living in the village for some time now, but every new season felt like an invitation to witness the world in a new way. The sky was vast, the river unhurried in its flow, and as he stood at the edge of the water, Lukos felt the pulse of time all around him. His thoughts drifted to the teachings of Erasius, who had once spoken of the cyclical nature of existence, the never-ending flow of life, death, and rebirth. The rhythms of nature, the seasons, the cycles of the moon and sun, and the ebb and flow of the tides were all reflections of a deeper truth. That time, in all its complexity, was both an external force and an internal experience. Lukos had understood this intellectually before, but now, as he stood there by the river, it felt more real than ever. The sound of footsteps behind him drew him from his thoughts. He turned to find Althea approaching, her steady gait familiar and comforting. She had been a guiding presence in his life for many years, and now she seemed to share his quiet reflection. "You're up early today, Lukos," she said with a soft smile, her voice as warm as the morning sun. Lukos nodded, the weight of his thoughts still on his mind. "I've been thinking a lot about time lately, about how everything flows, constantly changing, and yet there's a sense of stillness in it. I feel like I've understood so much in my journey, but time, it still eludes me." Althea paused beside him, her gaze turning to the flowing river. She too seemed to sense the deeper currents that ran beneath their lives. "Ah, time," she said, her voice soft. "It's something we cannot hold in our hands, yet it shapes every part of our lives. We live with it, we move through it, but we can never control it. All we can do is live within it. And perhaps that is where its true wisdom lies." Lukos looked at her, intrigued by the depth in her words. But how do we live with time? It feels as though time is always slipping through our fingers, and we cannot catch it no matter how hard we try. Althea smiled, her expression gentle but knowing. "Time is like the river, Lukos. It flows on, regardless of what we do. We cannot stop it, but we can learn to move with it. It is not about holding on to the past or rushing toward the future. It is about being present, in this moment, as it unfolds." If we resist time, we struggle. If we accept it, we flow with it. Her words hung in the air, and Lukos felt them settle deep within his heart. The journey he had been on had always been about seeking knowledge, understanding, and control, trying to grasp things that were intangible and fleeting. But now he realized that the key to living in harmony with time was not to fight it, but to let it flow through him, to embrace its rhythms, and to find meaning in each moment as it passed. For the rest of the morning, Lukos and Althea sat in silence by the river, the sound of the flowing water a constant companion. It was in these quiet moments, in the absence of words, that Lukos felt the presence of something larger than himself, something that existed beyond time, beyond thought, beyond even understanding. It was the flow of life itself, ever-changing and ever-present. The following days brought with them a new sense of clarity. Lukos began to see time not as a thing to be controlled or conquered, but as a part of the natural order of the world. Every moment, no matter how fleeting, had its place in the larger story of existence. He had spent so many years searching for answers, but now he understood that the true answer was not in the quest for control, but in the willingness to be present, to engage fully with the world as it unfolded. The village began to prepare for the upcoming planting season, and as Lukos worked alongside the farmers, he found himself more attuned to the rhythms of the earth. The cycles of planting, growing, and harvesting were not just tasks, they were reflections of life itself. As the seeds were sown into the soil, Lukos realized that they, too, were part of the eternal cycle of time. The seeds would grow, the crops would be harvested, and the cycle would begin again. It was a dance of life, death, and rebirth that was as old as the world itself. One evening, as Lukos helped carry the freshly harvested grain into the storage barn, he paused and looked out at the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for everything he had learned, for the people who had guided him, and for the life he was now living. The journey had brought him full circle, from the restless seeker to the man who understood that life's greatest wisdom was not in seeking more, but in living fully with what was. In that moment, he realized that time, in all its fleeting nature, was a gift. It was the gift of living, of experiencing, and of being. And in that understanding, he found a peace that he had never known before. Time was not something to be feared or controlled. It was simply to be embraced, to be lived with intention and gratitude. As Lukos sat down on the steps of his house that evening, the stars now bright overhead, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He was no longer seeking. He had come to understand that wisdom was not found in the answers, but in the living. Time would continue to flow, the seasons would change, and life would unfold. But Lukos knew now that the true wisdom lay in embracing the present moment, in being fully alive in the time he was given. And as the cool breeze of evening rustled the leaves in the trees, Lukos felt, for the first time, that his journey had truly come to a close, not because he had found all the answers, but because he had come to understand that the journey itself was the answer. The eternal dance of time would continue, and Lukos, fully present in each step, would continue to move with it. The village had always been a place of rhythm, seasons turning, tasks repeating, and the cycle of life unfolding before Lukos in a way he had come to cherish deeply. Yet, despite the peace and groundedness he had found, the inner question of his purpose still lingered like a shadow, never entirely gone. He had embraced silence, understood time, and connected deeply with the people around him. But there was still the quiet whisper in his heart, a sense that the full meaning of his journey had yet to be revealed. It was late in the autumn when Lukos's life took an unexpected turn. The air was crisp, the nights growing longer, and the harvest was nearly over. It was a season of endings, but also of preparation for the next beginning. As he worked in the fields alongside the farmers, the weight of his thoughts grew heavier. His life had become so deeply embedded in the cycles of nature and the rhythms of the village that he began to wonder whether the deeper purpose he sought might have to come from within, from some final integration of everything he had learned. One evening, as the golden light of dusk painted the world with soft hues, Lukos sat alone by the riverbank once more. The water flowed gently, reflecting the fading light like a mirror. He had grown accustomed to these moments of quiet reflection, moments where he allowed himself to simply be, to watch the flow of time and the world as it passed. But tonight, his mind was restless, his heart uncertain. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the world wash over him. The rustling of the trees, the murmur of the river, the distant calls of birds. In the silence, something stirred deep within him. It was not a new question, but an old one, lingering at the edges of his consciousness for months. What now? He had learned so much, yet he wondered if there was more to his path than simply living in peace. There were no more mountains to climb, no more cities to explore, no more great teachers to meet. He had come back to the village, embraced its rhythms, and found a deep sense of belonging. But what about the broader purpose of his life? Was it enough to simply be part of the whole? Or was there something else, some action or decision that would give his life deeper meaning? Lost in his thoughts, Lukos did not notice the figure approaching until a soft voice broke his reverie. "You look troubled, my friend," said a familiar voice. It was Althea, her steps light and graceful as always. She had long been a source of wisdom for him, guiding him through the complexities of life in the village and beyond. Lukos looked up, surprised at how her presence always seemed to soothe the storm in his mind. "It's nothing," he said, though he could tell from her knowing gaze that she could sense the unrest within him. "You are not one to hide your thoughts so easily, Lukos," Althea said gently, sitting beside him. "What weighs on you tonight?" Lukos hesitated, then spoke, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've learned so much, Althea. I've found peace here, and yet there's something within me that still feels like it's missing. I know how to live fully, how to be in tune with the world, how to embrace time and silence. But I still wonder if there's more. Is my purpose simply to be part of this village, to live in harmony with those around me? Or is there something else I must do? I find myself searching for something deeper, something that completes my journey." Althea looked at him with the same deep, steady gaze that had always helped him find clarity. She did not speak for a moment, as though she were allowing him time to process his thoughts. "Lukos," she began softly, "you have spent so much of your life searching for answers outside of yourself, in distant places, in the wisdom of others, and even in the silence of your own mind. But the question you ask, the one about your purpose, is not one that can be answered in the way you expect. It is not something to be found, something to be uncovered in a distant land or in grand gestures. Your purpose is not separate from you. It is something you create, with every action, every decision, every moment of your life. Your purpose is found in how you engage with the world, in how you live, how you love, and how you serve. It is not about finding one singular moment of revelation. It is about realizing that purpose is woven into the very fabric of each and every day." Lukos listened intently, his heart beginning to settle. The words felt like a balm, soothing the restless ache that had been growing inside of him. It was true, his purpose had never been a singular destination, but rather the way he had lived, the connections he had formed, and the peace he had cultivated. Purpose, he now saw, was not something external. It was an unfolding, something that evolved with every passing season. Althea's words resonated deeply with him. "So I am not supposed to be waiting for some grand sign or some great action," Lukos mused aloud. "Purpose is found in the simple choices of each day, in how I live, in how I serve and care for others." Althea nodded. "Exactly. And remember, Lukos, that every moment carries its own wisdom. There are no wasted moments, no insignificant actions. The way you plant a seed, the way you help a neighbor, the way you speak and listen, these are all part of your purpose. They are all small, essential threads in the tapestry of your life. In every small act, you are creating purpose, not by grand gestures or accomplishments, but by the way you live and engage with the world." Lukos looked at her, a sense of calm settling over him. "Thank you, Althea," he said quietly. "I think I understand now. I've been waiting for some great revelation, some grand act to define my purpose, but I see now that it has always been here, in the way I live every day." She smiled warmly. "You were always seeking something external, something beyond the immediate. But true purpose is found in the ordinary moments, in the way you live authentically, in the connections you build, and in the love you give." They sat in silence for a long while, the river flowing gently beside them. The world around them seemed to slow down in that moment, the quiet of the night filling the air. Lukos felt a sense of deep peace settle in his heart, as though the question that had plagued him for so long had finally been answered. He didn't need to seek purpose. It was here, in the world he was part of, in the people he loved, in the work he did, and in the way he moved through life. As the stars began to twinkle above, Lukos looked out at the river once more. Time flowed relentlessly, just as it always had. But now he understood that it was not something to be feared or fought against. It was a dance, a rhythm that was part of the greater whole. His purpose was not in a final destination, but in the journey itself, the dance with time, with life, with the world around him. "I think I've been searching for something that was always here," Lukos said, his voice calm and content. "Purpose isn't something I find. It's something I create with each step." Althea smiled and nodded, her eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom she had lived by for so many years. "Yes, Lukos, and the journey will continue, as it always does. There will be challenges, moments of uncertainty, and times when you feel lost. But remember, your purpose will always be found in the way you live, in the choices you make. And as long as you stay true to yourself, to the rhythm of the world, you will continue to create purpose with each moment." With that, they both sat in silence, content with the understanding that had passed between them. Lukos had come to realize that the search for purpose was not about some grand revelation or monumental act. It was about the small everyday moments that wove together the tapestry of life. And in those moments, purpose was always there, waiting to be embraced. The river flowed on, just as life would, and Lukos felt an overwhelming sense of peace as he returned to the village, ready to continue living, loving, and engaging with the world around him, knowing that each day was a new opportunity to create purpose. The rhythms of life in the village continued, each day flowing seamlessly into the next, and Lukos, now more at peace than ever, found himself deeply immersed in the cycles of work and rest, joy and sorrow, quiet moments and bustling days. Though he had once yearned for grand answers, for a grand purpose, he now felt the deep satisfaction that came from living authentically. Every task, whether repairing nets, working the fields, or sharing a meal, was filled with meaning. Every interaction, every moment of kindness, was part of the ever-unfolding process of life. Yet, as the years passed, Lukos began to see a subtle shift, not just in the seasons, but within himself. The village had become his home in a way he had never anticipated. The people he had once observed from a distance, now, in the deepening passage of time, had become like family. The boundaries between himself and the rhythms of the village had dissolved. The work was no longer just work. It was a shared experience, a co-creation of something much larger than himself. Despite the stillness he had come to cherish, there was one more subtle lesson that lingered in the back of his mind. A lesson that came from his conversations with Althea. As the seasons shifted again, from winter's quiet to the awakening promise of spring, Lukos felt the need to seek her out once more. His time with Althea had always been full of quiet wisdom, and as he observed the world around him, he realized that even the peace he had found seemed to call for something more. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky and the village was preparing for the season's first planting, Lukos found Althea by the river, as she often was in these quiet moments before the work of the day truly began. The sight of her, standing with the water flowing past her, seemed to symbolize the very flow of life that he had come to understand. She had aged, of course, the years marked by silver hair and the gentle creases at the corners of her eyes. But her presence, still steady and grounded, seemed to be a reflection of the wisdom she had always shared. "Althea," Lukos said as he approached her, "I've been thinking about the seasons, about the cycles. I've come to realize that life is always changing, always moving forward, like the river here. But there's something I still don't quite understand. I've embraced the rhythm of the world, the rhythm of the land, and I've come to find peace in it. But how do we know when the time has come to act? I've lived in harmony with everything around me, but sometimes I wonder, what is the call to action? When do we step forward and change something instead of simply following the flow?" Althea turned to him with a knowing smile, her eyes filled with both kindness and wisdom. She had always been attuned to the natural world, to the cycles that govern the land, but Lukos sensed there was something deeper in her understanding, something she had seen over the course of her long life, something that could answer his unspoken question. "Ah, Lukos," she said slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. The call to action is not always clear at first, but just as the seasons change, so too do the rhythms of our lives. There are moments when we are called to act, not because we seek change, but because change is inevitable. The world moves through its cycles, and we must move with it. But there is another part to this. When we are called to step forward, it is not out of a desire to control or change everything. It is because we are called to be in tune with the flow, not to resist it. Lukos looked at her, intrigued by the depth of her words. So it's not about forcing something to happen? It's about listening and responding when the time is right? Althea nodded. Exactly. Sometimes we act not because we know exactly what will happen, but because we are responding to the flow of life itself. Just as the river does not hesitate to move around obstacles, we too must learn to flow, to move through the world with purpose, even when we don't have all the answers. Life calls us to act, but we must also know when to wait, when to be still, and when to step into the current. Action is not always a choice driven by personal desire. Sometimes it is simply the next step in the cycle. Lukos took in her words deeply. It was not just the idea of purpose he had been grappling with, but the role of action in his life. He had learned to be present, to listen, and to understand the cycles of life. But now he understood that there were moments when he needed to move with the flow, not against it. To act not out of force, but because it was the natural course of things. "Do you mean," he asked, his voice thoughtful, "that sometimes the call to action comes when we align ourselves with the flow of life? When we stop trying to control it and instead become part of it?" Althea smiled gently. "Yes, Lukos. The greatest wisdom comes when we realize that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. When we stop fighting the flow of life and instead become part of it, action becomes an expression of that alignment. We don't need to force change, because change is always happening. We simply need to be present in the moment and listen. And then when the time comes, we can step forward with clarity and purpose." Lukos sat quietly beside her, feeling a deep sense of understanding begin to unfold within him. He had spent so much of his life seeking answers, trying to understand how to act in the world. But now, he saw that action was not about striving for control or pursuing a singular goal. It was about listening, responding, and allowing life to move through him, trusting that the right moments for action would reveal themselves when the time was right. As they sat in the quiet of the evening, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, Lukos realized that the cycle of life, much like the cycles of the seasons, was something that could be embraced fully. He did not need to seek a grand purpose, nor did he need to fear inaction. His purpose was not a singular moment of revelation. It was the steady unfolding of life, a life that was lived in harmony with the flow of time, in connection with others, and in alignment with the world around him. The breeze shifted, and the sound of the river grew louder as the night descended. It was a reminder of the constant movement of life, of the way time moved with purpose, whether or not one could see the full picture. Lukos felt at peace, knowing that he had learned to live in tune with that movement, and that he would continue to do so, with each new season, with each new day. "I understand now, Althea," Lukos said quietly, his heart full. "It's not about waiting for the right moment to act, but about being present and aligned with the world. When we are in tune with it, the right action will reveal itself." Althea nodded, her smile serene. "Exactly, my friend. The world does not demand perfection. It simply asks that we listen, that we move in harmony with its rhythms. And when we do, we are part of something greater, something eternal." With that, the two of them sat in silence, the sounds of the night filling the space between them. Lukos felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. His journey had brought him to this understanding, that life, time, and purpose were not things to be grasped or forced, but to be lived in harmony with. The dance of life was ever present, and he was learning to move with it, step by step, knowing that each moment of presence was an answer in itself. The passage of time felt more seamless than ever to Lukos. Seasons came and went, the days rolling into each other with a quiet rhythm, and every act, every moment of life, felt connected to something much larger than himself. After his conversation with Althea, he had begun to live even more fully in the present, moving through each day with an awareness of the flow of life around him. The rhythms of the village, the work in the fields, and the subtle changes in the natural world became a source of deep fulfillment. The harvest season had arrived, and the village was abuzz with activity as the last of the crops were gathered. Lukos, now fully integrated into the life of the village, worked alongside the farmers, the fishermen, and the artisans, each person contributing their labor to the collective effort. It was a time of both abundance and reflection, as the fruits of their hard work over the year were finally brought to fruition. Despite the busy work, there was a palpable sense of quiet satisfaction that hung in the air. The villagers worked with a calm focus, their movements steady and purposeful as they brought in the harvest. Lukos found himself caught up in the energy of the community, the shared understanding that the work they did together was not just for their own benefit, but for the well-being of all. Every sack of grain, every bundle of vegetables, every fish brought to the market was an offering to the collective good. It was a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things, the way their lives were bound together by the simple, yet profound, acts of giving and receiving. As the harvest progressed, Lukos found himself reflecting on the life he had built here, on the wisdom he had gained, and on the stillness he had embraced. It was a far cry from the restless search that had once defined him. He had come to understand that life was not about reaching some distant goal, some final destination of knowledge or fulfillment. It was about living fully in each moment, embracing both the quiet and the busy, the known and the unknown, and finding peace in the rhythms of everyday life. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows over the fields, Lukos found himself standing in the village square, watching the villagers gather to celebrate the completion of the harvest. The air was thick with the scent of roasting meats, fresh bread, and ripe fruits. The sounds of laughter and music filled the square as the people came together to share the fruits of their labor. Lukos smiled to himself as he watched the children run through the crowd, their faces lit with joy. The older villagers sat in clusters, exchanging stories and catching up on the events of the year. It was a time of celebration, but also of reflection. A moment to pause and give thanks for the bounty that the land had provided. Althea, who had been quietly observing the scene, walked over to Lukos. "It's a beautiful sight, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft but full of warmth. Lukos nodded. "It is. It's hard to believe how much we've accomplished, how much we've built together." Althea smiled, her gaze turning toward the people gathered around the fire. "It's a reminder of the cycles of life, Lukos. Every year we work together, we celebrate together, and then we begin again. It's in this cycle that we find meaning. We are part of something larger, something eternal. The work we do is not just for us, it is for those who come after us. And in that, we find purpose." Lukos looked around at the faces of the villagers, some young, some old, all working together, contributing to the whole. There was a quiet sense of fulfillment in their expressions, a deep understanding that their lives were part of something much larger than any one individual. The harvest was not just a physical act. It was a reflection of the interdependence of their lives, of the way they gave to one another, and of the way they worked together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. "We are all part of this," Lukos said softly, his voice filled with understanding. "The work, the relationships, the seasons, they are all connected. It's not just about the harvest or the tasks we do. It's about the way we live, the way we give, and the way we share our lives with each other." Althea nodded, her smile deepening. "Yes, Lukos, and the beauty of it is that we don't have to force it. The harvest, like life itself, comes when it's meant to. It's a natural process, one that we are part of, just as the seasons are. We plant the seeds, we tend to them, and when the time comes, the harvest is there. But it's not just the physical harvest, it's the harvest of our lives, the connections we make, the love we share, and the wisdom we pass down." Lukos paused, feeling the weight of her words. "I understand now," he said quietly. "It's not just the result that matters. It's the process, the way we live in harmony with the cycles of life, the way we give and receive. That's where the true fulfillment lies." Althea looked at him with pride, her eyes filled with quiet wisdom. "Yes, Lukos, the process, the journey, is where the meaning is found, and it's in the living of it, the being present with it, that we discover the fullness of life." As the evening wore on, the festivities continued. The villagers sang songs, danced around the fire, and shared stories of the year's challenges and triumphs. Lukos joined in, his heart full of gratitude for the life he had found here, for the wisdom he had gained, and for the community that had embraced him as one of their own. For the first time, he felt truly at peace. He had come full circle, from the restless seeker to the man who understood that life was not about searching for something external, but about living fully in each moment, embracing both the joys and the struggles that came with it. Purpose was not something to be found, it was something to be created, day by day, in the way he lived, in the connections he made, and in the love he shared. The fire burned brightly, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the villagers, and Lukos felt a deep sense of contentment. The cycles of life would continue, the seasons would change, but he had found his place within it. His journey had not been a destination, but an ongoing process of growth, of connection, and of understanding. And as the night drew to a close and the stars filled the sky above, Lukos knew that this, here and now, was enough. He had found peace in the present, in the flow of life, in the rhythm of the world around him. The winter months came slowly, painting the village in soft, silvery hues as the first frost settled across the landscape. The harvest was over, the fields now lying still, waiting for the next cycle. The long nights and shorter days brought a quietude to the village as the people gathered indoors, their homes warmed by hearth and firelight. The time of hard labor had passed, and now the season called for reflection, rest, and preparation for the new life that spring would bring. Lukos, having embraced his role in the community with quiet devotion, now found himself in a place of deep reflection. His work in the village had given him purpose, but it was more than just the tasks of daily life that occupied his thoughts. There were moments, like the stillness of the winter nights, where he found himself contemplating the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the many teachers he had encountered, the philosophers, the artists, the workers, the hermits, and the elders. All had shaped his understanding, but now he felt that he was standing at the threshold of something deeper. One particularly crisp evening, as the fire crackled and the village settled into the quiet of night, Lukos decided to visit Althea. Though they had spent much time together over the years, there was always a sense that there was something more she could offer him, something he had yet to fully understand. She had lived through countless winters, seen the cycles of life and death, of planting and harvesting, and of community and solitude. She was a living embodiment of the wisdom he had been searching for, and in this time of reflection, he felt the need to seek her out once again. The walk to her small cottage on the edge of the village was familiar, but tonight there was a weight in the air. The moon was full, casting its pale light across the snow-covered ground, and the cold seemed sharper than usual. The village lay still, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something. When he arrived at her doorstep, Althea was already waiting for him, a small fire burning in the hearth behind her. Her presence was as serene as ever, her face soft, but weathered with the wisdom of years. She welcomed him in without a word, and they sat by the fire, the only sound the crackling of the flames and the wind whistling outside. The warmth of the fire felt grounding, familiar, like the embrace of the earth itself. "Althea," Lukos began, his voice tinged with a quiet urgency, "I've been thinking. For so long I searched for purpose. I went to distant lands, I met many teachers, I learned from the philosophers and the artists. But now, I realize that purpose isn't something you can go looking for. It's something that comes when you align yourself with the rhythms of life, when you engage fully with the world. The work, the relationships, the quiet moments, all of it has meaning. But there's something deeper I still feel is missing. I've found peace in the simplicity of life here, and yet I wonder if there's something more that calls to me. Althea regarded him with a quiet smile, her gaze calm as she leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees. Lukos, you've learned much, and you've come far, but I sense that you've reached a place of deep questioning, a place where the path ahead is not as clear as it once seemed, and that's a natural part of the journey. You've lived the cycles of life, planting, growing, and harvesting. But you're asking a deeper question now, one that lies beyond the physical work and the rhythms of nature. You're asking about the spiritual meaning of it all, the meaning behind the cycles themselves. Lukos nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Yes, Althea. I've spent so many years asking, what is my purpose? What am I meant to do? But now, I feel like the question itself has changed. It's not just about doing something, or about achieving some goal. It's about understanding why we do it in the first place. Why do we give of ourselves? Why do we work? Why do we love? And why do we lose? Althea's eyes softened as she looked at him. You have already begun to understand, Lukos, but there is still something that you must learn. The work, the relationships, the love. We do these things not for some future goal, but because they are part of the great cycle of life. Just as the earth gives itself to the seeds, the seasons, the land, so too do we give of ourselves. The question isn't about what you must do. It's about what you must become. It's about becoming one with the cycle of life. You see, Lukos, purpose isn't found in one action or one moment. It is found in the way you live, in the way you surrender to the rhythms of the world. The purpose of your life is to live in harmony with those rhythms. Lukos felt a profound sense of understanding wash over him. So it's not about reaching some ultimate destination or achieving some grand goal. It's about living in harmony, flowing with the world around us, being fully present in the journey itself. Althea smiled, her eyes reflecting a depth of wisdom that came from years of living in harmony with the land, the seasons, and the people around her. Yes, Lukos. It's about being fully alive in each moment, not trying to control it or force it. It's about living with purpose in everything you do, from the smallest task to the grandest. The purpose of life is not something we find in the future. It is something we experience in the present, in every interaction, in every choice. Lukos sat in silence for a long while, contemplating her words. It was as though a veil had been lifted from his eyes, revealing the deeper truth that had always been right in front of him. The search for purpose was not something to be chased, something to be attained. It was a way of being. It was in the living, in the surrendering to the natural flow of life, that purpose was revealed. Althea, Lukos said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. I've been searching for something outside of myself for so long, but I see now that it was always about living with intention. Purpose is not something external. It is something internal. It is the way we engage with the world. Althea nodded, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Yes, Lukos. The truth has always been within you. It is not something to be grasped, but something to be lived. And the more you live with intention, the more you will find that purpose flows naturally from the choices you make. Just as the river flows, not forced, but guided by its natural course, so too does your life flow with purpose when you align yourself with the rhythms of the world. They sat in silence again, the fire flickering softly between them. Lukos felt a profound sense of peace. He no longer felt the need to search for meaning, to chase some distant goal. The purpose he had been seeking was already here, in the present moment, in the choices he made, and in the life he was living. As the night deepened, the stars shining brightly above, Lukos realized that his journey had come full circle. He had searched far and wide, asked countless questions, and learned from many great teachers. But the greatest lesson of all was one he had discovered in the stillness of the present moment, in the quiet surrender to the rhythms of life. Purpose was not a destination. It was the journey itself. Lukos stood, his heart full, and looked at Althea. Thank you, Althea, for everything. I see now that I have always been part of the greater whole, and I will continue to live with purpose, not by seeking it, but by embracing the life I have been given. Althea's smile was gentle, her eyes twinkling with a wisdom that had been passed down through the generations. You found it, Lukos. The cycle continues, and you are part of it. Live with love, with intention, and with the knowledge that the purpose of your life is woven into the very fabric of the world. Lukos stepped outside, the cold night air filling his lungs. The stars above shone brightly, and the world seemed to pulse with life. The river flowed on, as it always had, and he too would continue to flow with it, moving through the cycles of life with a deep sense of peace and purpose. The fire's glow danced in the hearth of Lukos's home as the winter months settled deeply in the village. The winds howled outside, rattling the windows and stirring the snowdrifts that lay thick upon the ground. Yet within the walls of the small cottage, Lukos felt a warm contentment. The stillness of winter, with its quiet reflection, had brought him a sense of peace and completion, as though the lessons he had learned throughout his life had all converged into a single, harmonious understanding. In the years since his return to the village, Lukos had come to realize that the greatest wisdom lay not in seeking answers, but in living with the questions. He had discovered that purpose was not a destination or a grand achievement. It was a way of being, a way of engaging fully with the world, with time, and with the people around him. He had learned to listen to the natural rhythms of life, to flow with them, and to live in harmony with the cycles of nature. Yet, as winter deepened and the days grew colder, Lukos began to feel another shift within himself. A quiet urging, a call to do more. This sense was subtle, a faint whisper within his heart, reminding him that even though he had found peace, there was something still left to explore. It wasn't about seeking purpose again, but about taking the next step in his journey. The step from understanding to sharing, from being a participant in the cycles of life to being a teacher and guide for others. One afternoon, as the village was blanketed in snow, Lukos made his way to the town square. The village had been quiet, most of the people indoors, preparing for the coming of the new year. The village square was empty, save for a few children playing in the snow, their laughter ringing out through the still air. As Lukos walked through the square, he noticed something. The old oak tree at the center of the square, which had stood for generations, had been stripped of its leaves. It was barren, but still strong. It seemed to embody everything he had come to understand about life, about cycles, about stillness, about the space between seasons. Standing under the tree, Lukos felt the quiet wisdom of it. It had withstood countless winters, its branches bare now, but its roots deep in the earth. There was something about this tree that reminded him of the wisdom he had gained, how everything in life was connected, how everything, in its own time, had a purpose. As he stood there, lost in thought, he was joined by Althea, who had quietly appeared at his side. She had a deep knowing about the seasons of life, the natural world, and the cycles that governed everything. She too had always been part of the rhythms that shaped the village. "You are deep in thought, Lukos," Althea said gently, her eyes following his gaze to the old oak tree. Lukos nodded. "I've been thinking about the life of this tree, Althea. It stands here, year after year, shedding its leaves, growing new ones, and then shedding them again. The same cycle, over and over. And yet, each time it does, the tree is different. It's still the same tree, but it has lived through so many seasons." Althea smiled softly. "Yes, and each season is necessary for the tree's growth. The shedding of the leaves is not a loss. It's part of the process of renewal. The tree's roots go deep into the earth, and every year it draws from that deep well of wisdom. The seasons may change, but the tree's purpose remains constant. It's part of something larger, something timeless." Lukos felt the weight of her words settle within him. "I understand now. The cycles of life, the shedding, the renewal, they're not just for the earth and the trees. They're in us too. We too go through seasons of growth and loss, of giving and receiving. And like the tree, we are part of something larger, something that continues long after we are gone." Althea nodded, her gaze soft but steady. "Exactly. And just as the tree shares its wisdom with the seasons, so too do we share our wisdom with the world. Each of us has our own season to live, our own part to play in the greater cycle. But it's not just about living for ourselves. It's about living for the future, for those who come after us. The legacy we leave is not in what we take, but in what we give." Lukos's heart swelled with understanding. He had spent so many years searching for meaning, for purpose, that he had forgotten the true nature of the journey. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about achieving personal fulfillment or grand success. It was about sharing what he had learned, about giving back to the world. It was about passing on the wisdom that had been passed to him, just as the tree had given its shade, its fruit, and its shelter to those around it. "I understand now," Luco said quietly. "The purpose of living is not to seek our own fulfillment, but to be part of the world, to contribute to it, and to leave something behind for those who come after us. Just as the tree's roots nourish the soil for the next season, our actions nourish the world for the next generation." Althea's smile deepened. "Yes, Lucos, and that, my friend, is the greatest gift of all, the gift of giving, of leaving behind a legacy not of material wealth or achievements, but of wisdom, love, and kindness. It's in how we live, in how we love, and in how we give of ourselves that we create meaning. Just as the tree's roots grow deep into the earth, so too does our impact stretch far beyond what we can see. The seeds we plant, the lessons we pass on, will continue to grow in ways we cannot always foresee." Luco stood in silence, feeling the full weight of her words. The wind had picked up, swirling around them, but the stillness within him remained. The lessons he had learned, of living in harmony with the cycles of life, of finding purpose in the present moment, of embracing the flow of time, were now complete. And yet, he realized, his journey was not over. It was merely another beginning, a new season. As winter deepened, the village gathered to celebrate the turning of the year. The cold, dark nights were filled with warmth and light as families came together to share food, to tell stories, and to reflect on the year gone by. Lucos felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had experienced, for all the lessons that had shaped him into the person he had become. He had traveled far, learned from many, and returned home to discover that the wisdom he had been seeking had always been here, in the simple rhythms of life. And now, as he stood in the village square, surrounded by the people who had become his family, Lucos understood that the greatest legacy he could leave was not in what he accomplished, but in how he lived. He had found his purpose, not in seeking something distant, but in living fully in each moment, in embracing the cycles of life, and in sharing the wisdom he had gained. The year turned, and the first stirrings of spring began to awaken. The earth, once again, began to show signs of life. And as the days lengthened and the world began to blossom anew, Lucos stood beneath the oak tree, feeling the flow of time continue around him. He had come full circle, but he knew that his journey, like the tree, would continue to unfold. Life was a circle, always turning, always evolving, and he was ready to embrace whatever came next. As spring's first light began to stretch over the hills, casting a warm glow across the snow-dappled earth, Lucos found himself once again standing at the edge of the village. The wind had softened, and the once frozen river now flowed with renewed vigor, its waters reflecting the brilliance of the sky. The world, like the people in it, seemed to be awakening from the quiet of winter, stretching toward the promise of new life. For Lucos, the changing of the seasons had become a symbol of his own journey, a reminder that, just as the earth moves through cycles of growth, rest, and renewal, so too did life. It was in this constant ebb and flow that true wisdom could be found, not in the striving for some singular achievement, but in the embrace of the process, in the willingness to move with the flow of time, to adapt to each phase of life as it unfolded. Yet even as spring heralded a new beginning, Lucos felt a sense of quiet contemplation. He had learned so much over the years, about stillness, about the importance of listening, about the rhythms of life, and about finding purpose not in distant goals, but in the here and now. He had lived fully, shared his wisdom with the people of the village, and contributed to the community in meaningful ways. But as the seasons changed, so too did the questions that lingered in his heart. What was the next step? What was his role in the continuing cycle of life? The answer came in the form of a question from the younger generation. One afternoon, as Lucos worked alongside the village's young men and women to repair the wooden carts and prepare the fields for planting, one of the young men, Theo, approached him with a thoughtful expression. Theo had grown up in the village, and though he was still in his early 20s, His eyes were filled with the same restless curiosity that had once marked Lukos's own youth. "Lukos," Theo said, his voice respectful, but filled with the hunger for understanding that Lukos recognized so well. "You've lived here for so long now, and you've seen so much of the world. You've learned from so many people, and I've heard the stories of your travels, of the teachers you've met. You speak often of wisdom, of living in harmony with the world. But I wonder, how do we know when we are truly living with purpose? How do we find our own way, just as you did? What is the secret to living fully, to finding meaning in the work we do?" Lukos paused in his work, a deep silence falling between them. He looked at Theo, seeing in him the same fire, the same desire for truth that had once burned so brightly within himself. The question was a simple one, yet it contained a depth of yearning that demanded an answer. "Your question is an important one, Theo," Lukos said, his voice slow and measured. "I, too, once asked that very question. I spent years seeking answers, trying to understand the deeper meaning of life. I looked for teachers, for knowledge, for some great revelation that would tell me what my purpose was. But the truth, as I've learned, is simpler than that." Theo's eyes were wide with curiosity, and Lukos could see the eagerness to learn in every fiber of his being. Lukos smiled gently, sitting down on a nearby stone and motioning for Theo to sit beside him. "Purpose is not something you find outside of yourself, Theo," Lukos continued. "It's something you create, moment by moment, through the way you live. There is no single, grand revelation, no single answer that will guide you through all of life's questions. Purpose is found in the daily acts of living, of working, of serving others, of contributing to the world in whatever way you can. It's about aligning yourself with the flow of life, with the seasons, and with the needs of those around you." Theo furrowed his brow, clearly trying to process this idea. But how do we know when we're on the right path? How do we know when we're living our purpose? Lukos thought for a moment, looking out over the village, where the people were beginning to gather for the spring festival. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, the sound of joy and vitality filling the air. He turned back to Theo, his voice soft but filled with certainty. "You know you're living your purpose when you feel connected to the people around you, to the earth beneath your feet, to the cycles of life that guide us all. When you give of yourself, not out of obligation, but out of love. And when you feel a deep sense of peace and fulfillment in the work you do, then you know you are walking the right path. Purpose is not something you chase. It's something that arises naturally when you live in alignment with the world, when you give of yourself to something greater than your own desires." Theo nodded slowly, though Lukos could see the conflict still present in his eyes. He understood the challenge. He had been there himself. The quest for purpose was not a question that could be answered in a single conversation or with a single act. It was a journey, one that unfolded over time, through trial and error, through moments of doubt and clarity. "The path may not always be clear," Lukos continued, "and there will be times when you feel uncertain or lost. But remember this, the journey itself is the purpose. It's in how you live, how you engage with the world, that the answers will come. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the steps you took, the choices you made, were part of the path all along." Lukos looked at Theo with a deep sense of affection. He saw in him the same restless spirit, the same drive to find meaning that had once defined his own life. And yet, he knew that Theo's journey would be his own. The road ahead would be filled with questions, with challenges, and with moments of uncertainty, but it would also be filled with the quiet joy of living in harmony with the world, with the peace that came from giving of oneself and engaging fully with life. Theo sat quietly for a moment, absorbing Lukos's words. Then, with a small but sincere smile, he nodded. "I think I understand, Lukos. It's not about finding the right answer. It's about living in the right way." Lukos returned the smile, his heart swelling with pride. "Exactly, Theo. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. We are all part of the same journey, and we are here to help each other along the way." As Theo stood to return to his work, Lukos felt a deep sense of fulfillment. In answering Theo's question, he had come to realize something profound. The greatest gift he could give was not just the wisdom he had gained, but the willingness to pass it on, to share what he had learned, to guide others as they began their own journeys, just as he had been guided. As the spring festival began in earnest, with music and laughter filling the air, Lukos stood in the center of the village square, surrounded by the people he had come to love. His heart was full, not just with the peace he had found in his own life, but with a new sense of purpose, the purpose of passing on the torch, of guiding the next generation to find their own path. The village, the earth, and the cycles of life were all intertwined, just as the people were. And as Lukos looked around at the faces of his friends and neighbors, he understood that his journey was not just about him, it was about all of them, together. The wisdom he had gained was not meant to be kept, but to be shared, so that the next generation could carry it forward and continue the cycle. In that moment, as the music played and the sun set behind the hills, Lukos knew that his purpose had never been about finding an end point. It had always been about living with intention, giving of oneself, and passing on the wisdom that had been passed to him. And as he stood there, surrounded by the people he had come to call family, he felt a deep, profound peace. The circle of life, the circle of wisdom, had come full circle,